a mighty man, victorious in numerous battles, ascends to become a powerful king. Yet, he reincarnates into another life, carrying memories of his past existence, now trapped in the body of a helpless child. Nothing unfolds as he desires, and his body feels like a prison. In this new world, there are powers unfamiliar to him, powers he finds utterly fascinating. Now, he must gain strength as swiftly as possible. We see blood running down the blade of a sword against a backdrop of flames. Beneath a crimson sky, the man holding the sword appears to have slain a woman who lies lifeless on the ground. Subsequently, this same man tells us that he has become the king. Demonstrating unparalleled skill, he effortlessly destroys an opponent, proclaiming victory as he drives his sword into the man's body. At that moment, a fleet of warplanes crosses the sky and bombs an entire city, causing endless explosions followed by the terrified screams of the population. With each passing moment, the king watches the war-torn scene as his cape billows with the intensity of the bombs in front of him. According to him, he had become the most powerful king. Or rather, placing his hand on a showcase that held the crown he used to wear, the man laments that, in truth, he was once a king. Suddenly, he is thrown into his subconscious as if it were an ocean, where he dives and sinks as he lets his body be carried by its own weight. Amidst this, the voice of a child pleading please and a beautiful, green field appear. Then, a feather moves toward the warrior as we hear the child say, "In your new life, seek the light." Thus, the once king is reborn in the body of a child. The father is proud that the boy's hair color is the same as the mother's, while she is pleased to see that the son's eyes are identical to the husband's. The man welcomes little Arthur to this world and introduces himself as Reynold. Seeing the man's goofy demeanor, Arthur seems to have retained his old consciousness in the new body. Confused, he tries to understand who these people are until they both declare themselves his parents. At that moment, trapped in his old adult mindset, Arthur realizes he has just been born. Ironic as it may be, after a lifetime of battles and victories, he has been reduced to a helpless little child. Unaware of any of this, the mother pats the boy on the back to make him cough. And that's exactly what he does. Still not quite understanding what's happening, Arthur reflects that Alice and Ray seem to take good care of him, and both are convinced they really are his parents, whatever the reason may be. However, being a baby with an adult mind brings a persistent sense of fear. When he is placed in the crib, he ends up grabbing his father's finger, who is overjoyed to tell his wife. Frustrated, Arthur knows it was just a reflex action, almost instinctive, just like the cry he's about to let out, which was interrupted by a bowel movement replacing the tears. Definitely, his bodily functions are well beyond his control, and nothing happens as he plans, as if his tiny body were a kind of prison. Arthur tries to wake up, but the nightmare continues. As if that weren't enough, he would soon witness something even more absurd. Then, as he is carried out of the house in his mother's arms, the boy sees his father infuse his hands with magic and shatter a rock with a punch. A piece of rock falls on the big guy's head. Then Alice heals him with a magic spell. Observing this, Arthur reflects that there are powers in this world that he is unaware of, which is truly fascinating. Reynolds, with his gauntlet fused with magic, was capable of hunting even the fiercest wild boars in the forest. When he saw his father return from the hunt that day, the baby thought that knowledge was an advantage, so he scrutinized his surroundings carefully. For example, in this society, individuals may possess weapons, indicating a certain level of danger around that compels people to become strong as soon as possible. And Arthur himself does not wish to be an exception. Alice rocks the boy to sleep, and he ponders that these days have brought endless frustration. But moments like these aren't so bad, as, remembering tense moments in his past life where the opposition wasn't always loyal, he couldn't sleep so peacefully at any time. Regardless, the new life as a baby continues for little Arthur, and now he learns to crawl. At one point, he reaches a mirror in his parents' room and sees his reflection for the first time. The parents are thrilled with each discovery their son makes, while the kid is still trying to get used to his name. Although, for him, this isn't any serious issue. At bedtime, Alice kisses the little one after laying him out in the crib. However, unlike falling asleep, the rascal climbs down from the crib like Rapunzel from the tower of the castle to venture out. After all, after a long period suffering from his bodily impulses, Now he begins to better control his limbs and needs. While his mother washes the dishes, he crosses the kitchen stealthily, knowing he must make no noise. Upon opening a door, he completes his mission, reaching the bookshelf. After all, as he had thought, knowledge is an advantage, and now Arthur has found what he was looking for, information about this world. According to one of the books he picked up, this continent he was born on, Dicathan, is home to 3 kingdoms. Darv, an underground nation of dwarves. Ilenoir, a country of elves living deep within a forest. And lastly, Sapin, where Arthur is, the region controlled by humans and the most populous. Like his nation in his past life, it is a monarchy. But the difference is that the throne of this country is inherited, not taken. Moreover, this world still seems technologically outdated compared to his old one, and another book explained that this place was still primitive because of magic. In this world, there is a source of power called mana, and the ability to control this magical energy is largely hereditary, occurring in about 1 in every 100 people. In general, there are 2 forms of mana applications, amplification and conjuration. Amplifiers use mana to enhance their bodies, providing incredible strength, agility, and defense. On the other hand, conjurers are able to project mana to control it as they wish. The key to controlling mana is the mana core, and the power of magic awakens from the onset of puberty through late adolescence. Channeling the mana scattered throughout the body solely into the core, until you can control it, is what makes you a mage. Arthur is well aware of the principle of becoming conscious of his inner power until he can take control of it and then release it, and the center of his Kai is crucial for making this work. Luckily, the knowledge from the past life of the deceased king may be useful in his new existence, and that is what he tries to do as he begins a meditation that takes him to an empty space within his mind, where a fraction of mana is awakened and concentrated between his hands. However, suddenly, Alice arrives after searching the whole house for the troublemaker. Lovingly, she asks him not to scare Mom like that, but her smile falters when she notices something odd about her son. Arthur thinks she discovered his ability to use Kai, but she only realized that the baby had pooped. Faced with this, Arthur becomes even more convinced that his body is a prison and that he needs to gain more power. The next day, Alice writes in a diary that Arthur was born 2 years ago, noting how cute, curious, and good he is. However, it bothers her that he has never smiled. Outside the house, Ray teaches his son to use a stick as if it were a sword and convinces the boy that he has a knack for it. He calls his wife to take a look at the kid's moves, but Alice is not at all happy to see her darling little boy playing with such violent things. Speaking of 2 years of life, it was what Arthur needed to understand the power structure between this couple. Or maybe it's the case that women rule in this whole world. Later, the little boy is taken to the city. According to his mother, he always gets excited when he arrives at this place. Meanwhile, Arthur absorbs a lot of information to understand this world while walking in a busy area. For instance, by looking at the variety and quality of weapons, he can judge the level of technological advancement of the nation. Still, there are several substances that did not exist where he lived before, in addition to having the chance to personally observe magic, which is equally surprising and productive. On the way home, in the late afternoon, while sleeping on his mother's back, the baby thinks that this couple has met all his needs, and that although it is a limited life, it is not unpleasant. Because of this, he wonders if this is how a family functions, as this is something he never had the chance to feel. Anyway, this warm way of his mother is not at all bad. And speaking of affection, Alice points out that she is very happy when her son gets out of bed to read, or when his eyes sparkle when visiting the market in the city, and that he probably got that from Ray. Like him, perhaps Arthur also wants to someday go out to explore the world. Honestly, the mother would prefer to see the boy leading a peaceful life. When dawn breaks again, Arthur watches his father practicing and ponders that he is very lucky to have such an example to follow. After further shattering the rock he had already destroyed, Ray gives a thumbs up to his son and asks if he isn't amazing. The mother puts her hand on the boy's shoulder and comments that the show wasn't that big of a deal, but that now things are going to get better. That said, Reynolds throws a punch in the air that causes powerful gusts of wind. Additionally, by stomping on the ground, he causes a wave of wind that leaves his son awestruck. Definitely, Ray is an amplifier, and this gives Arthur even more desire to get his hands dirty and evolve his strength a bit. However, his mother is the natural obstacle to his learning, given that the son is just a baby and needs to take his afternoon nap at this time. Thus, Arthur does not give up and stretches his hand towards the bookshelf, making it clear he wants to get close. Alice denies the request and reinforces that it's time for the baby to sleep. But then he appeals to cuteness to get what he wants, and the strategy works. Upon grabbing one of the books, the boy feels like a great victor. As he starts meditating, he recalls that he acquired a variety of knowledge over these 2 years of life, and among them, the most valuable is knowing how to produce a mana core, accumulating in one point the countless fragments of magical energy scattered throughout the body. This task required a lot of effort and dedication, but it's finally paying off. By the way, upon gathering the last fragment, Arthur causes an explosion that destroys a good part of his house. Outside, Ray had shielded his wife from the debris, but ended up suffering a serious injury to his back. The two rush inside to see how Arthur is, and Ray reaches the sun first. He can't believe what he's seeing. After all, the boy is only 3 years old and is levitating above his own manifestation of mana as if he were a grown adult. With a sly smile on his face, Arthur assesses that his days of study have finally borne fruit, which is a great first step. However, parts of the wooden ceiling threaten to fall on the child's head, and the first thing he thinks is that he can't die now after what he just achieved. Finally, Alice dives to grab her son, while Ray uses all his mana-imbued strength to push away the wood that was about to crush his son. After being saved, the baby looks at his mother with sparkling eyes and decrees that indeed these two do everything to keep him safe, and that this is the role that parents need to play for their children. Ray asks how the boy is, and Alice responds in tears that he's fine, clutching the little guy as if he were the most precious thing on the face of the earth. Indeed, for her, he really is. Meanwhile, Arthur doesn't understand why the woman is crying. Recalling a moment from a past life, when he won an opponent in a duel in adolescence and saw the kid being consoled by his parents, the boy simply has trouble understanding, and that is something he certainly wouldn't learn from any book in this world. Soon, the boy himself starts crying and hugs his mother tightly. After this, we see a man being judged for his crimes. Although he had been a loyal servant, he attempted to take His Majesty's life, and according to the law, such an infraction is so severe that it would warrant immediate and harsh punishment. However, the council showed mercy towards the servant, allowing him to return home and face judgment there. In the presence of his wife and son, the man confesses his attempt on the king's life, but pleads that only he be sentenced, asking for his family to be spared. According to him, if he were to return to his home country now, a fate worse than death awaits all three. If this is what the man must face, let it be him alone. Thus, the offender implores King Grey to fulfill his wish. Speaking through one of the strange pillars in the room, a counselor states that the criminal was very reckless in his actions towards His Majesty, the light that guides everyone, who should not be bothered with such trivial matters. Consequently, the council decides to punish the entire family, and Grey ends the lives of the woman and child in front of the man. Witnessing the horrific scene, the counselors consider that the king doing this with his own hands is a sign of pure mercy, as the sovereign freed the two poor souls from eternal suffering. Finally, just like the pillars, the family man also thanks the monarch. Returning to Arthur, he receives from the king gauntlets identical to his own. The man was all excited as he handed the item to his son, but the kid seemed more interested in the wooden sword he already had. Pondering alone, the child reflects that if he had to use such a weapon with a child's body, he would die before the enemy could get within range. Regardless, he picks up a stick and calls his son to a duel. Arthur doesn't back down and delivers a sequence of attacks demonstrating great agility. After blocking each blow, his opponent activates a mana reinforcement that imbues the sword. To his surprise, Arthur does the same and shatters the piece of wood from the king. Seeing what he witnessed, the adult wastes no time and talks to Alice, saying it would be good for the kid to have a private mentor. In turn, the woman thinks this idea is absurd since her husband had already said he would train the son. That was what Ray truly wanted to do, but the truth is that the boy's talent is too great and needs a teacher equal to the task to guide him on the right path. Thus, Alice offers to teach magic to Arthur, but Ray argues that the boy's magic is a special case, as he cut a piece of mono-reinforced wood at 4 years old. From that moment, Alice realizes the gravity of the matter but insists on opposing this decision, not wanting to see her dear little boy go to some distant city. Ray asks her to think about their son's future, and she asks her husband to think about his present, because if Arthur leaves, the parents won't see him grow up. In the midst of this discussion, Arthur considers that there are times when emotions narrow a person's perspective, so he proposes a third option: everyone going together. Upon hearing this, the parents look at each other and open their mouths as if the kid had just reinvented the wheel, and then they rush to pack their bags. In the end, Arthur reflects that both have enough energy to act this way all the time. Hours later, in front of 2 carriages, the child's father tells him to introduce himself, and he announces himself as Arthur Lewin. On the other side, armed people gather near the Lewins' house. One of the warriors kneels before the kid and tells him they had met before, but that Arthur is too young to remember. However, Arthur remembers very well. These are the Twin Horns, the group that Reynolds and Alice were part of. The man leading is named Adam Crench, and one of the women, Angela Rose, grabs Arthur tightly as if he were a stuffed animal, and he ends up being saved by Durden Walker, who extends his hand for the young man to slap. Excluding him, atop one of the carriages, remained silent the mysterious Jasmine Flamesworth, and lastly, the pointy-eared archer introduces herself as Helen Shard. Soon, with everything ready, Reynolds orders the carriages to depart, and the journey finally begins. Without delay, Arthur notes how outdated this mode of transport is, very different from the ships that infested the sky in his last life. But he finds the carriage not so bad. The convoy is heading towards the city of Xyrus, but before they arrive, a problem occurs along the way. During a break for rest, the group is attacked by a pack of wolves. Arthur watches alongside his mother as the lupines attack Jasmine, who draws her daggers and ends the enemies in a movement that seems simple because it's so well executed. Then, Reynolds uses the gauntlet to punch another wolf, while Adam Crench drives his spear into another animal's chest. Helen shoots arrows that take down targets at a distance, making Arthur notice that the archer, Adam, and Jasmine are enhancers. On the other hand, being conjurers, Durden Walker conjures a powerful earth magic that shakes the battlefield, and Angela Rose wards off an opponent with a wind spell. Watching the spectacle, Arthur concludes that he needs to reach these guys' level soon. After the fight, the group decides to spend the night there. When the sun gives way to the moon, fires are lit for a meal. Ray tells his son not to hold back and eat whatever he wants, but the truth is that the boy isn't so used to the kind of food you eat when hunting in the middle of a journey. On the other hand, Alice stuffs herself until she becomes ill. By the way, she sees that her husband is injured and stands up to heal him, but before that happens, Helen, Jasmine, and Durden approach, and Alice had to wait for the archer to grant permission for the healing for some reason. Amid the restoration process, Arthur thinks that his mother appears to be a special type of mage, a broadcaster, with healing powers. Since this is so rare and valuable, it is not wise to heal people openly, as it would make her a target. By the way, Reynolds and Alice also live in the countryside for this reason, to hide this power. With the restoration complete, the husband thanks his wife. Then, Adam tells Reynolds he wants to do some exercise before bed. To everyone's surprise, the spearman asks to borrow Arthur. Coinciding with the training, Arthur notices the adult showcasing his weapon and doubts it's just a workout. But since he's already there, he has no choice but to join in. When Adam imbues his spear with mana, the child notices the man isn't going to go easy, so he does the same as his rival, but with more intensity, also casting a greenish buff on his legs that impresses Adam. Even at 4 years old, Arthur displays extraordinary speed and manages to surprise his opponent by appearing behind him. However, despite putting him in a vulnerable position, the child loses his balance in the step and forfeits the positional advantage. Nonetheless, the two engage in an open duel until the spearman conjures a skill that flings the youngster into the air. While Arthur laments his body is too light for this fight, Angela prevents his fall with wind magic. After the duel, Durden and Helen complain that Adam was too rough on the boy, but the spearman insists Arthur is a relentless little monster. On that note, he wants to know what kind of training or weird juice the father gave to the child, but Ray responds that he never did anything. In fact, in the midst of this, Jasmine suddenly appears in front of Arthur, asking him to teach her how he pulled off that move. Arthur knows that It's the eyes of someone who won't give up until they get what they want. By the late afternoon of the following day, the little boy surveys his cart and concludes that the journey has been quite smooth. The next day, the convoy takes another break, and Arthur uses the opportunity to evolve his body and mind in certain aspects, receiving training from the adults there, each contributing with their specific skills. Moreover, just as he learned, he feels a tremendous honor to share the knowledge of his past life with the dagger girl. Focusing his body, the boy conjures the greenish buff he used in the fight with Adam and shows the speed achievable when you are armed with this power. At night, the 4-year-old lights a candle to read a book in front of Jasmine. After that, he stops to eat something as usual, but something unexpected happens. As dawn breaks again, Jasmine thanks the little boy with a dagger tied with a rope as a gift, knowing that today is his birthday. Watching the scene closely, the other women find it incredible that Jasmine finally made friends with someone, which is very difficult for her. At this point, the men call the rest to continue the journey, and Arthur sees his mother feeling ill with something, though she pretends nothing is happening. Finally, the convoy resumes its journey towards Xyrus, but at a certain part of the route, it is attacked by a gang of thieves who have set up an ambush and shoot several arrows at the travelers. Angela uses her magic to repel some, but the situation is grim, as there are many enemies. Their leader demands that the women and children be kept alive to retain their value, while Arthur reflects that such people exist in any world. Soon, the group of bandits on the hill slides down the ravine towards the victims. Alice holds her son tight and promises to protect him. Durden launches a fireball that devastates the ravine, while Reynolds takes down several adversaries along the way with his martial techniques. Helen prevents an ally from being hurt by shooting an arrow into the heart of the bandit attacking him from behind, while Adam takes advantage of his spear's reach to hit targets in front of him. Jasmine, always the fastest, moves through the battlefield almost untouched. Arthur believes his allies form a more talented group individually, but that's not all that counts in a battle. Maintaining his devastating fury, Durden eliminates several opponents to save Angela Rose, but those thugs seem to swarm like ants in an anthill. No matter how many fell, 3 took their place. Thus, Arthur concludes that these guys' strength, as is quite obvious, lies in their numbers. Despite having shown great performance in the fight, Ray is thrown with force into one of the carriages and is temporarily out of combat. Alice and Arthur exit the stricken cart, but the family patriarch tells the two to get in, claiming his injury is nothing serious. Moreover, if the bandits learn of Alice's power, things would really get ugly, so Arthur must take his mother and flee. Outraged, the boy insists he is old enough to fight, so the father tells him to use that strength to protect his mother, as she is expecting another child. Upon hearing this, Arthur immediately understands why his mother had been ill those times. For this reason, he acknowledges his responsibility and buffs his feet again. As he approaches the Lewin family, the chief of the bandits orders his henchmen to chase after the child and the woman. At the same time, Ray attacks the man with all his strength and, although weakened by injuries, still manages to drag the enemy across the ground and halt his advance. Meanwhile, Arthur and Alice are caught off guard by a pair of thieves who had placed themselves in their path. But Jasmine and Adam kill the two to clear the passage, just as Helen covers the child and mother from a distance with her bow. As he runs desperately, Arthur reflects on the irony of life. He, who took everything from others in his former self, now flees so that others do not take everything from him. Remembering how he acted in his past life, the man in the child's body wonders if this is what karma is. Eventually, during the escape, a wizard from the gang of thieves casts a spell on Arthur and Alice. The child pushes his mother to save her and absorbs the entire impact alone, falling from the cliff. With that, Arthur draws the dagger he received as a gift from Jasmine and vows to take his assassin with him to the beyond. As he throws the knife, the rope wraps around the enemy's leg and pulls him down. Durden and Angela rush to prevent the child's fall with magic, while Alice screams her son's name, who by then was too far away to be saved. As he falls, Arthur reflects on the strange fact that he hasn't gained anything, yet he feels fulfilled. Now, he finally understands what that man was pleading for when he begged for his family's life, and why Alice seems to be crying so much. To save their family, both she and Reynolds do not hesitate to sacrifice themselves, and the mere thought of never seeing someone they love again brings them to tears. In a way, it's a mix of joy and sadness, and that's what Arthur feels as he grasps the idea that he was about to gain a little brother. Without a doubt, it would have been wonderful. Hours later, as night falls in the forest where the convoy was attacked, Arthur lies fallen and unconscious until he finally awakens and, still groggy, tries to understand where he is. At that moment, very heavy footsteps could be heard nearby, and the ground shook as they approached. Without delay, a colossal and fearsome creature faces Arthur and, for some reason, bids him good morning by name, as if the two knew each other. Meanwhile, in a magical and indecipherable realm, a little girl says she found something beautiful, something she probably won't come across a second time. Another girl replies that bad things are bound to happen. Back to Arthur, his face was twisted in terror. Trying to keep his composure, his adult mind wondered what that creature was, and what he himself was doing there. Maybe, thinking he was the same as in his past life, the little boy charges at the monster only to be swatted away like a mosquito. The older, feminine voice from the mystical realm speaks again, this time through the giant beast. She tells Arthur he still has a long way to go, and that she's actually on his side. With that said, the creature walks over to a fruit tree and picks several pieces, offering them to the boy, guessing he wants to heal. Arthur tries to move, but his body is badly injured, his movements barely functional. The creature tells him he should consider himself lucky to even be alive. But if he doesn't eat the fruit, she won't answer a single one of his questions. So, the boy devours one of the fruits and immediately asks how his parents are doing. The creature says she can't leave this place, but she can see a bit beyond its walls. Then, she reveals a glimpse of the bloody battle that had unfolded. Still, she assures Arthur that his mother and father are safe. They managed to escape a few days ago. The news that they're both alive overwhelms Arthur. A single tear runs down his cheek as he expresses just how happy he is. Not quite knowing who to thank, he's soon introduced to the beast's named Sylvia. Inside that strange shell, the younger girl asks what she should do now. Sylvia explains that the answer is right there. Days passed since Arthur had been rescued by the creature. Since yesterday, his wounds had healed, and all he wanted now was to go home. But that wasn't going to happen just yet. According to the monster, they were near the outskirts of Elshire Forest, a place crawling with wild animals and outlaws. Still, Sylvia had come up with a way to get Arthur out of there. In a conversation with the boy, she realizes he wants to leave right away. But she tells him that opening a dimensional portal takes some preparation. Bored, Arthur picks up a stick from the ground and starts swinging it around like a sword. Sylvia chuckles, saying it's good to move the body around and that kids should always stay active and healthy. In the middle of his training, the boy reflects on how Sylvia had never spoken about herself. If she had been fighting something before, he has no clue. And yet, despite her terrifying appearance, she seems kind. After practicing, Arthur takes a moment to meditate. His aura flows through his body and Sylvia is stunned to see such a young boy already possessing a mana core. Curious, she gathers magical energy into her hand and asks Arthur if he's capable of doing the same. The boy just stares, stunned. The creature then asks if he knows what she's doing. He replies that she's gathering mana while casting magic. Internally, he likens the action to a plane refueling midair. Sylvia points out that people often have a rigid idea of what mana is. They separate the act of gathering mana from the act of using it. But other races don't think that way, especially mana beasts, who do it naturally, like breathing. Then, she asks if the boy would like to have that kind of ability. Seeing his excitement, she presses further, what would he do with such power? After all, he'd be immensely strong. Arthur takes a while to respond. He thinks back to all the people who protected him in this second life. And then, with resolve in his voice, he declares that he will bring destruction to anyone who dares to take away what is precious to him. Without missing a beat, Sylvia flicks him on the forehead so hard that he bounces like a ping-pong ball. She tells him he failed the test. Frustrated, Arthur protests, it's only natural to want to destroy your enemies. That's exactly what he did in his past life. That's how he rose to become the most powerful king of his time. But Sylvia isn't impressed. She points out that he's corrupting his mind with thoughts of ending other people's lives. Then, she pauses, maybe she hit him too hard. But the boy insists he's fine. Sylvia reminds him that her hands could easily crush him. But they could also be gentle. so she asks which would he prefer. Naturally, Arthur chooses the gentle touch. Sylvia agrees. After all, anger and hatred burn quickly and often lash out as violence. Maybe it feels good in the moment, but those feelings always end in hate, nothing more. She tells him that she didn't save his life so he could use it for something like that. Hearing those words, Arthur starts to wonder if that beast somehow knows everything about him, even though that should be impossible. Sylvia then returns to the original question. What will you do when you have that power in your hands? Again, Arthur recalls memories of his time with friends and with his parents. With determination in his eyes, he says he wants to protect the people he loves. Sylvia smiles. That, she says, is the perfect answer. Meanwhile, not far from them, a beast of the same kind as Sylvia prowls the perimeter, vowing not to let her escape. In the next scene, we're taken into a memory from Arthur's past life. As he walks down the corridor, the servants bow their heads to the great King Grey, who steps into a room where a lord appears surprised by his majesty's arrival. Immediately, the man expresses his gratitude for such an honorable visit. But Grey reflects inwardly he was king only in name. Back then, political power rested entirely with the parliament. The nation's resources were drying up, birth rates were declining, and all that remained for the king was war. He had become nothing more than a killing machine. The old man praises Grey, saying his many victories brought wealth and glory to the people. But setting that aside, he humbly asks what brings the sovereign to his door. Gazing at the paintings on the wall, Grey turns to leave and informs Marlon that he is going to abdicate the throne. Some time later, the royal crown lies shattered on the floor, and the king's sword planted into the ground like a stake. Now in his second life, Arthur begins to learn how to control a power that few will ever even lay eyes on. Sylvia tells him that, once mastered, the possibilities of this technique will be limitless. In the middle of it all, the boy tries to stay focused, sweating as he struggles to keep calm and do what needs to be done. In his previous life, there were many things the great King Grey didn't have, though there was one thing he craved above all to keep winning: control over Kai. In one brutal battle against a massive beast, after landing a hit, the monarch watched as his sword became engulfed in that powerful energy. Now, all these years later, and strangely enough, Arthur seems to have luck on his side. Still very young, he manages to gather the magic needed to complete the exercise his teacher assigned. With a smile on his face, he's suddenly hit by a powerful blow and thrown behind a few rocks. Sylvia quickly tells him to stay quiet. Doing his best to remain hidden, the boy spots a monster one that looks just like Sylvia. She seems startled that this other being managed to find her. The male creature explains that he was drawn by the smell of blood and orders Sylvia to come with him. She refuses, which forces him to turn to violence to get what he wants. Without hesitation, he conjures a dark force and launches it toward her. Sylvia manages to absorb the impact, but the magic still takes a toll on her body. She drops to her knees in pain, and Arthur looks on, deeply worried. The male warns her that pushing herself like this will only shorten her lifespan. Sylvia throws the warning right back at him as she summons an aura so intense, it causes her body to crack and shatter, completely leaving behind only the power of her spirit, now taking the form of a magnificent winged creature. Like a dragon, Sylvia unleashes a torrent of magical energy upon her foe. He roars back, promising she'll pay dearly for using that kind of power. But she doesn't care. She's already lived a good life, even if she wishes it could have lasted longer. With great effort, the enemy manages to shake off the spell and causes the entire cave to tremble. Without wasting time, he conjures a disturbing number of magical spheres and hurls them at his rival. After the attack hits, Sylvia looks around anxiously, searching for Arthur. Her opponent questions why she's acting that way. Not letting up, the male monster sends another magical sphere her way, but Sylvia responds instantly with a technique that freezes time itself, leaving only her and Arthur untouched by the effect. With time paused, she calls Arthur out and tells him she had to use her power, but more importantly, she asks if she looks more like Sylvia now. Confused, Arthur asks if she's a dragon, and the creature explains that that's what humans call her species. She then opens a dimensional portal and apologizes, saying the exit isn't as close as she thought it would be. Still, everything will be fine. She's already taught Arthur everything he needs to survive. Before he goes, she asks him again what he intends to do with the power he now possesses. He responds with certainty, he'll protect the people he loves. At that moment, Arthur notices how badly hurt his friend is. But before he can say anything, she cuts him off and gives him a few parting gifts. An egg, which must be wrapped in a feather and taken care of with great care, and a mysterious mark that now covers his arms. However, the beast doesn't explain the purpose of the mark, she simply assures him he'll understand it when the time comes. At last, Sylvia tells him it's time to say goodbye, even though the boy is visibly shaken by the thought of parting with his dear companion. She confesses that she could have sent him back home a long time ago, but the truth is, she didn't want to. She enjoyed living by his side during this time. Sad, Arthur asks if there's no way he can protect Sylvia with his power. After all, he was given this strength, and he promised to protect the ones he loves. But Sylvia explains that what's happening now was inevitable, so that promise doesn't apply here. The calm, matter-of-fact way she said it surprises the young boy. He wonders if it's the gratitude he feels for her that's making everything hurt so much. Maybe the time they spent together has changed him forever. And then, through tears, Arthur says that he doesn't care if Sylvia is a dragon, she's like family to him. Sylvia reminds him that he already has a mother, but when Arthur says she could be his grandmother, the creature's eyes widen with emotion. Pretending it's nothing, she softly asks him to call her that again. The boy repeats the word, and it makes a single tear fall from the dragon's eye. She then gently pushes Arthur toward the egg and feather so he can grab them and enter the portal. Just as he's about to fully step through, Arthur turns back and begs Sylvia to come with him, but it's too late. The portal's magnetic pull of mana has already dragged the boy in and made him vanish. Now alone, Sylvia takes one final breath and releases her hold on time, allowing it to return to normal. At that very moment, the enemy's magical sphere strikes her directly and throws her to the ground. He mocks her, saying she's finally decided to stay quiet. But then, noticing the pool of blood forming around her, he starts to worry he may have overdone it, even though he doubts someone like Sylvia could ever be killed by such a weak attack. And he's right, Sylvia is still alive. Playing dead to lower his guard, she unleashes her magical torrent straight at him. The force is so overwhelming that a massive explosion fills the entire cave and can be seen from a great distance, its scale enormous. Inside Sylvia's mind, she wonders if it was enough. A younger voice responds it was. With that, the elder leaves the rest in her companion's hands, who promises to take care of everything. Meanwhile, Arthur was crossing through the portal. Sylvia spoke to him telepathically, asking if he remembered what she had told him. When he confirmed, the dragoness assured him that he was going to be just fine. Even so, Arthur couldn't help but feel that the whole situation was incredibly sad. Sylvia agreed, reminding him that the world is, by nature, a place filled with sorrow, but that it's still possible to turn all those negative feelings into happiness. Arthur shouted that he wasn't capable of doing that, but his friend calmly told him it was okay if he couldn't do it yet. What mattered was taking one step at a time, little by little. That's all she wanted for him. After all, she knew he could do it because he had once been the strongest king she had ever known. Hearing those words, the boy froze, confused by how she even knew that. But Sylvia simply asked him not to let his heart be consumed by hatred or anger, but by light instead. And hearing that, something began to click inside him. Arthur started to believe that Sylvia might have been the one responsible for a very important moment in his past. Suddenly, he found himself lying in the exact same position he had been in when he first met Sylvia. His eyes welled up with tears as the truth hit him. Then, quietly, he got up and placed the gift, the egg, inside his bag. Just then, a sound echoed nearby. Immediately, Arthur uses his muscle enhancement to reach the top of a tree. From there, he notices that the egg he had received was vulnerable. He zips up his bag to protect it, then leaps from branch to branch until he encounters a group of bandits who had attacked a carriage and were taking a young elf maiden prisoner to sell her as a slave. Witnessing this scene, Arthur instantly remembers being attacked by that gang a few days ago. When the elf is thrown into the carriage to be taken away, his anger surges. He recalls how Sylvia had refused to teach him her powers because of his violent rhetoric. With this in mind, Arthur vows not to let negative emotions take over. He then pursues the stolen carriage to a camp the bandits had set up as night began to fall. One of the bandits remarks it would be a pity to sell the little girl without having some fun first, setting off alarm bells for Arthur. Regardless, he decides to wait patiently in a meditative state to act at the best possible moment. As night falls, Arthur observes the horned wolves and wonders why they obey these people without resistance. He then notices they are restrained with magical collars that make them docile. Arthur throws fruits from a tree at one of the wolves, angering them and causing a commotion that the gang at the campfire hears. To silence the wolves, one of the accomplices resorts to indiscriminate violence. Seizing the moment, Arthur defeats this man using his mana as if it were a blade. With the enemy down, he steals his weapon and sees the second man approaching to investigate the delay. Without hesitation, Arthur swiftly ends the second man and notes how exhausting it is to fight with a child's body. The third man approaches to check on the delay of his accomplices and is swiftly cut down by Arthur, severing his leg instantly. Though still alive, the bandit warns his fourth comrade that the intruding boy is a mage. With this information, the henchman reveals his own mana and shows that he too can use magic. Moreover, he expresses a desire to keep Arthur alive since a child wizard would fetch a higher price than the elf they captured. The bandit attacks Arthur, who quickly dodges and retaliates with a flying kick, but misses his target. In turn, the young boy throws his dagger tied to a rope at the opponent, but the bandit catches the weapon mid-air, thwarting Arthur's plan. Vulnerable, Arthur is thrown to the ground by a powerful kick and grabbed to be taken away, but he retaliates with a touch of fire on the attacker's knee, setting him ablaze for a brief moment. Enraged, the bandit decides he no longer wants to capture the boy alive. Now, he is determined to sell him to those collectors of bizarre bodies. However, seizing on the adversary's anger, Arthur throws the dagger with a rope again, hitting the target's forehead and killing him instantly. Seeing the young mage approaching, the third surviving element begs to be spared. Then, Arthur recalls that the young girl had also pleaded for mercy from the man, but he does not remember him having listened to her. Thus, Arthur finishes off the bandit and enters the carriage to remove the blindfold from the captured young elf. For a moment, he sees the elf as if she were someone else, but with no time to ponder on it, he decides to take the girl out of the vehicle and tells her she is free to go. The elf asks if the human is hurt, and Arthur shows a wound that would definitely make a child of his cry. Putting that aside, he reflects that this is the first time he's seen someone his age since he was born in this world. Finally, he covers the bodies of the bandits with blankets, claiming that it's not something a child like the elf should see. The girl responds that the human is also a child, leaving him without an answer. She wants to know what happened to the guys who kidnapped her, so the boy lies that they were involved in an accident, but that everything is now fine. The next thing Arthur does is gather the girl's belongings and remarks that it was fortunate he arrived in time. Hearing this, she blushes and grabs the boy's hand. While saying nothing, she hopes her expression conveys that she cannot be left alone because she is afraid. Arthur assures her that the guys won't bother her anymore. Then she thinks to herself, this kid must be crazy to leave a girl this pretty alone. Honestly, Arthur thought that a forest like this should be safe for an elf, but she corrects him, saying her parents once mentioned that a child elf could be eaten remorselessly by a ghost tree. Hearing this, Arthur asks which direction she came from, and she points randomly, actually in the opposite direction from where she arrived. To rectify the situation, he inquires how far she is from home, but she also has no idea, as she was chasing insects and got lost. Arthur concludes that this individual is not very rational, but supposes that children are generally like that. Lilac, he remembers himself when he was a kid in his previous life, alone and abandoned in a cell, and decides he will not leave this girl alone. The issue is that he has no idea how to control the horned wolves and imagines it would be better to spare them the pain, but the elf suggests they just be released. Arthur worries they might attack, but she assures him that the animals were only being used by those bad people and have no intention of being aggressive. Moreover, the forest people cherish life. With that, she releases the animals, and they leave without causing trouble. After that, the pair walks through the forest until dawn. During a break, Arthur asks the companion her name, and she introduces herself as Tesha Iralith. After saying his name, Arthur Lewin serves her some soup, imagining she might be hungry and in need of sustenance for the long journey ahead. His own remark reminds the boy of the fruits Sylvia offered back in the cave days. Indeed, Arthur is beginning to sound like Sylvia. Tesha confesses that the food smells odd, and Arthur explains that it's just boiled dried meat with a bit of salt, which probably would have tasted better with some herbs. Faced with the elf's grimace at the meal, Arthur reflects that he has always seen food merely as a means to obtain nutrition. Tesha admits she would love to have some sweets, and Arthur concludes that this child is a model of childlike behavior. She asks why he came to Ulster Forest, and he mentions that he lost track of his family, which makes the elf feel a connection, as she too is lost. Arthur inquires about life in the land of the elves, and she shares that it's fun in Elenoir. Since her parents are very busy, she spends a lot of time with her grandfather and caretakers. Soon, the journey proves to be much longer than Arthur expected. So far, there's no indication of Elenoir's location. At one point, Tesha becomes surrounded by numerous insects which, according to her, are common in her homeland for marking trails. Tesha places an insect on Arthur's ear pretending it's an earring, and he discovers that this is how children play, as he never had the chance to be a child himself. During their walk, Tesha excitedly talks about how, when her mana awakens, she will train at her master's house. Arthur asks if there isn't a school system in her land, instead of a private mentor, but the elf has no idea what he means by that. Meanwhile, a horned wolf lurks in the forest, and Arthur is aware of it. When night falls, this animal begins to howl, and the boy believes he should have killed the wolf to prevent a possible attack at dawn. Arthur tells Tesha to rest in the tent while he keeps watch outside for a while. Alone, the human tries to understand what Sylvia intended by giving him that egg. Later, Tesha can't sleep, so she even remembers her grandfather telling her never to sleep with any boys, but she's willing to keep a secret about Arthur. Nonetheless, he isn't sleepy and insists she try to sleep again. Still worried, the elf argues that if the boy stays outside, some bandit will notice there are children there, which could bring trouble. Realizing that's not what the girl meant, he asks if she's afraid of ghosts, and she pretends she isn't, arguing that she's just concerned about their safety, so it's best if the human keeps watch inside the tent. After her insistence, Arthur eventually enters, and Tesha continues to pretend she isn't scared, but asks that the boy not leave the tent without telling her, and asks him to accompany her to the bathroom when needed. With everything calmer, Tesha mentions that Arthur must be from the human kingdom, and she heard from her grandfather that the men there are perverts and have many wives. Arthur asks if the girl even knows what perverted means, but she thinks she doesn't. When he explains that it's mostly the aristocracy that tends to have more than one wife, the girl is practically asleep until she finally drifts off. Curiously, Arthur feels this must be what having a sister is like. Hours later, day begins to dawn, and the two are sleeping inside the tent. After they pack up, the journey continues, and Arthur feels that Tesha has gotten used to him and seems to have forgotten the men who attacked her. Truth be told, the boy was worried about his family, and not being able to go after them soon was frustrating. But something unexpected happened and changed his perspective. Suddenly, from his mana core, an unbearable pain surges through the boy. Tesha runs to pick some plants that might alleviate the pain, and as he is suffering too much, Arthur cannot stop the girl from entering the dangerous woods alone. As time passes, the pain doesn't improve, and the intervals between the bouts get even shorter. To make matters worse, the horned wolf appears in front of him with a piglet in its mouth. Tesha arrives shortly after with a medicine for stomach pain, and Arthur tells her to stay away from the wolf. However, the wolf lays the pig on the ground and leaves without showing any hostility. Seeing this, Tesha believes the animal might be grateful for having been set free. When the moon takes over the sky again, the pair set up another campfire to spend the night and feed on the pig left by the horned lupine. Tesha mentions she didn't find medicinal herbs, but she found mushrooms that might be useful, as they are so nutritious that the women in Elenoir always eat them. Excited about this, Arthur even eats the mushrooms, but then spends the entire night spraying the trees and cleaning his rear with leaves. As bedtime approaches, the human's eyelids begin to weigh down, while Tesha says that the elves always tell stories at bedtime, stories about the human kingdom and the nation of dwarves. The elf has always wanted to visit these places, but thinks there are too many bad people there. In fact, the people of Elenoir tend not to trust outsiders because of this, especially humans. When she finishes talking, Tesha realizes that Arthur has fallen asleep, so she covers the boy with a blanket and concludes that she is the more grown-up of the two. When morning arrives, the pair set off once again for the hike, and Arthur Lewin suffers from stomach pain and also in his monocore. Unfortunately, as he himself knows, children are too weak for journeys as harsh as these. Tesha pauses to point out that the two of them have become quite close over the days, so she asks if it's okay to call the human Art, as if they were friends. He says it's fine, but as the girl complains that his response was too dry, he says the following sarcastically. For someone from the countryside and of humble origin like me, being called so affectionately by Lady Tesha Iralith is an honor I am unworthy of. Tesha complains that his jokes sound like they're from an old man, and he retorts that he doesn't want to hear that from a crybaby who can't even go to the bathroom alone. The elf gets annoyed with the boy's behavior, especially since she was just starting to think of him as a friend. The word friend brings back horrible memories for the human, but he lets it go for now. Soon after, the two reach a portal that makes Tesha happy, as they have finally arrived. She walks up to the passage and reaches out her hand to her friend, whom she now calls Art. They then step through the portal and arrive in Lenoir, a majestic elven city nestled in the forest. Tesha is accustomed to the place and lands gently on the territory, but Arthur seems to have crashed to the ground. At that moment, a battalion of elves approaches after being alerted by the use of teleportation in the area, and the soldiers grab the human unceremoniously. Arthur cries out Tesha's name, asking her to do something, but strangely, she remains silent in the face of the aggression. At that very moment, Arthur bitterly regretted letting his guard down because of Tesha's innocence. Earlier, they had grown closer, and now the boy blamed himself for falling for the tricks of that opportunistic elf. Suddenly, an elf ordered that the human be killed, but Tesha demanded they stop. The elf argued that beings of Arthur's race were extremely dangerous, but the little girl insisted that this boy was the reason she had returned home safe and sound. Still, the officer accused Arthur of brainwashing her, until an older elf appeared through an energy portal and ordered that the human be left alone. Tesha greeted her grandfather, who introduced himself as Virian Iralith, the former king of Lenoir. He thanked Arthur for saving his granddaughter, revealing she was none other than the princess of Lenoir. Hearing this, Arthur was extremely surprised, as the girl had never mentioned her royal status. Soon after, the child's parents arrived in a carriage, hurried and relieved to see their daughter was safe. However, the king was furious to notice a human's presence and demanded that Arthur be arrested. But Virian announced that he had ordered the soldiers to lower their weapons, as, despite being a barbarian, this boy had rescued Princess Tesha. The little girl confirmed this account and even requested that the boy be invited to the castle. The king was at a loss, as inviting a human to the elf palace was almost a crime against their species, but Tesha showed all the compassion in the world by setting aside these prejudices and inviting her friend for a meal. Before they left, Virian mentioned he would like to speak with Arthur later, and Arthur noted that this elf seemed to possess some kind of mysterious power. On their way to the castle, Tesha took Arthur by the hand, and they passed through the market set amidst the giant trees of the Elshire forest, where the curious homes of the inhabitants of the kingdom of Lenoir were built. Everywhere he went, the boy could feel the tension in the air, and the weight of those glares that gave him no peace for even a moment. Indeed, the hatred for humans was so deeply rooted in that society that it was impossible for them to act normally. Just like Arthur had read in history books, the past wars had left wounds that had never healed. Observing every detail of that eccentric region, Arthur noted that not only was the city peculiar, but so was this girl who was said to be the princess. Although she had secured his life in the moment of tension with the guards, the look she gave when Arthur was grabbed was quite dark, and the boy couldn't understand why she had behaved that way initially. Besides, the throbbing pain in his chest continued to exact its toll, but come what may, he must not let his guard down again, for it had almost cost him his life in this unfamiliar land. After the walk, they reached the castle, and Tesha was greeted by her many maids. She asked that Arthur be treated in the best possible way, as he was her savior, and if there were concerns about him being human, she assured them that the boy was a good person. First things first, Arthur requested a conversation with his friend about everything that was happening. Soon, Tesha's parents and grandfather gathered for this discussion, and the table was served with high-quality food. Arthur stood by the table because he did not feel worthy of joining the others, but Tesha insisted that he join everyone for the meal. sitting at the head of the table, the human felt even more withdrawn and exposed, as he was the intruder, the stranger. By the way, the king initiated the conversation by introducing himself as Alduin Iralith, and mentioned that the queen's name was Muriel. Arthur Lewin introduced himself as a humble peasant born in a poor village within the kingdom of Sapin, and he felt honored that someone of his social class had the opportunity to be alongside the aristocracy of a distant kingdom. Alduin praised the boy's education and vocabulary, and Arthur felt that he had scored a point, as things would never progress if they continued to see him as just a child there. The king asked what had happened in the forest, and Arthur omitted some things, but not the fact that he had been separated from his family during a bandit attack. That is, not that he had lied about everything, but let's just say some things he said weren't the whole truth. Then, when he mentioned the part where he met Tesha, the atmosphere in the room suddenly changed. Alduin slammed his fist on the table upon discovering that slave traders were about to take his daughter, and he once again highlighted the wickedness of humans for engaging in such an evil profession. Pardon the interruption. Arthur argued that no profession is determined by race, and that any species could commit such an atrocity. Virion asked how the boy had managed to rescue the princess from the bandits, considering he was just a child. Arthur revealed that he was a mage, and had used his sorcery to eliminate the criminals and rescue Tesha. An elvish soldier at the table contested this claim, as a child could never do that, and even accused the boy of deceiving the princess just to infiltrate this kingdom. Virion ordered for the last time that none of the soldiers raise their voice to the visitor, and Tesha confirmed the human's version, vividly remembering those men planning to sell her because of the value her race would have on the market. Suddenly, as she found herself immersed in these traumatic thoughts, Tesha was embraced by her mother with immense affection and support. Alduin believed the human story, who thanked them for their trust, but also had a request to make. As mentioned, Arthur had been attacked by bandits, and his only wish was to return to Sapin and reunite with his family. On the other hand, although things had been smooth so far, the deep scars of the troubled relationship between the two races began to resurface, and Alduin was not inclined to show so much compassion to a human to the extent of helping him in this. However, Arthur stated that this was precisely why he had made this request. If the elves claim that humans are mere savages, surely they do not behave in the same manner. Alduin was left speechless, and Virion remarked that the boy had caught him there. Whatever the case, the king mentions that the existing hatred between the two races won't disappear overnight. Tesha steps in, making a stern face at her father in an attempt to make him adjust his stance in this conversation. Immediately feeling the pressure from the young girl, the leader of the Elenwar elves reveals that, for starters, the teleportation portal to the kingdom of Sapin is only accessible to the council of rulers from the three races, held every 7 years, with the next opening not due for another 5 years. On the other hand, the king cannot allow a human to live among them for that long, so he arranges for some soldiers to escort the visitor back home tomorrow morning. Arthur is moved by the chance to return to his homeland until the pain in his chest overtakes him again, contorting his face in agony. At night, the elves provide a room for their guest, and as he showers, Arthur notices the pain worsening with each passing moment. In that instant, he silently calls out to Sylvia, as if she could somehow hear him. After the shower, he steps out onto the balcony and finds comfort in the night breeze to ease his suffering. As his condition worsens, the boy decides he must discover the cause of this pain once and for all. Then, he sees Tesha with her parents and wonders if Reynolds and Alice are all right. In his mind, his parents would never die easily and surely escaped safely. But the growing longing makes Arthur question if, when they reunite, they will smile at him as Tesha's parents are smiling at her. Amid this reflection, Tesha notices he seems restless about something. Due to the chest pain, Arthur can't sleep and decides to walk around the kingdom, and at some point, the royal family member catches up with him. He asks if he interrupted her spoiled princess moment, and she tells him to cut out the jokes. Later, she apologizes for how her father and the others treated the human earlier. In turn, Arthur is calm, as it only shows how worried they were about her. In his opinion, she should take advantage of all this to behave like the spoiled princess she is. Hearing this again infuriates the girl, but she swallows her anger to emphasize that everything will return to normal once Arthur finds his family again. With that, he bows his head and questions whether his parents would indeed be happy to see him again, as they were attacked because of him. and ever since he was born into this world, the boy feels he has only brought trouble. Internally, despite being so young, Arthur feels guilty for not having been able to protect his family. Seeing the boy's pain, Tesha shakes his head and asserts that his parents are definitely sad that they can't see their son, and that he's talking nonsense because even she is already sad that the little boy will leave, even though he hasn't left yet, showing how much he is cherished, even if he doesn't believe it and sees himself so negatively. Just then, a spectacle of natural lights begins to grow and parade through the air of that balcony, and Arthur is able to clearly see Ray and Alice amidst it. This makes him question what he was fighting against, after all. Tesha explains that these are called firefly bees. Despite the beauty of that moment, the human can't get the expression on the elf's face out of his head when he was captured by the soldiers, making him think that he is still dominated by the darkness within himself while waging a war with his past. With this in mind, the boy apologizes to the elf, but before he could explain why, a projectile is fired dangerously close to them. Then Arthur grabs the projectile on reflex and runs to see what happened. The attacker was none other than Lord Virion, who had been observing the conversation from a distance. However, the elf replies that the bee he threw was nowhere near lethal. Then, Arthur opens his hand and realizes it was indeed just a simple firefly bee. Virion emphasizes that the boy's defense and reflexes were instantaneous, so the story about the fight with the slave traders seems to be true. Arthur asks if the guy is doing this just to test him, while Tesha tells her grandfather to stop picking on the boy, as Art isn't the type of human he hates. Virion responds that he would never come just to make fun of the young man. In fact, by summoning a wooden sword, he confesses that it's been a long time since he's seen someone so interesting. Then, the elf throws the weapon to the human and moves his granddaughter further away with a levitation power. Knowing what it entails, the boy holds his sword in combat stance, then strikes trying to surprise the opponent with his speed. However, despite his age, the former king of this land shows unusual agility and successfully dodges the blow. Curiously, even though he's much younger, Arthur needs to use mana to accelerate his movements and keep his defense high, because the truth is that the opponent is much faster than him. When Virion misses a blow, the boy sees his chance to catch the elf off guard, but no matter how hard he tries, Virion is always able to escape every attempt to be hit. Moreover, in a masterstroke, the former king breaks Arthur's sword into pieces with his hand. A piece of wood flies towards Tesha. Then Arthur throws the handle of the weapon to change its trajectory and prevent the girl from getting hurt. From there, the boy appeals to his magic and gathers a good amount of mana to charge at his opponent, but the elf seems to have an answer to everything. This reminds Arthur of the look he saw in the beasts he faced in the arena in his previous life. The claws and fangs ready for a final attack, launched instinctively at the right moment. When that time comes, it's kill or be killed, nothing less. After being repelled by the opponent, Arthur is thrown back, but doesn't lose his balance and resumes his offensive with enthusiasm. With incredible speed, he finally manages to hit Virion, who really didn't expect that to happen. Anyway, he announces that it's time for the second round, but Tesha pinches the old man's ear and tells him to take it easy and stop mistreating Art. Virion replies that if he had gone easy, he himself would have been mistreated, and Arthur finds this absurd but says it's an honor to be overestimated by the Lord. In turn, Virion thinks that if Arthur truly believes in honor, he should become his apprentice. The human is stunned by that response, but the elf is serious and reaffirms his invitation to train him. Arthur remembers that his parents still don't know he's alive, and that it would only worsen the situation for him to stay holed up in this forest. But Virion offers to let the child's parents know that he is well. The boy is excited by the idea, but the pain in his chest returns and steals his joy of living. As he had already suspected, Lord Virion asserts that young Lewin has inherited a bestial will, so it is very important that he become his apprentice. Otherwise, Arthur Lewin will die. At another moment, Arthur found himself lying in a dark, surreal space. The pain in his chest grew so intense that it tore a hole through his body, forcibly releasing a manifestation of his anxiety, one that turned against him. Art couldn't even move to defend himself from the malevolent entity. But just in time, he was jolted awake by his new elf friend, who pulled him out of that nightmare. Even awake, the boy was still half asleep, mumbling for just 5 more minutes to the monster from his dream. Tesha, clearly offended at being called a monster by the brat, lost patience and shook him harder, reminding him he needed to meet with his grandfather. After some persistence, Arthur finally got out of bed. Tesha asked if he'd truly decided to stay there. He told the princess he wasn't sure yet, maybe things would feel clearer after his walk. But the moment he called her princess, the elf pinched his back in protest, reminding him she didn't want to be treated with such formality. Later, when they arrived at their appointment, King Alduin was grumbling to his father, saying they shouldn't allow a human child to stay in the elven city, it went against their laws and traditions. But Virion insisted he liked the boy and wanted him to remain for a while longer. Hearing her father complain, Tesha reminded him that Arthur had saved her life. Alduin snapped back, telling her to stay quiet. Virion, clearly tired of the argument, dismissed them both and told the two kids to hop into the carriage. As it started moving, Arthur asked how long it would take to reach the mysterious friend of Grandpa. The seasoned elf chuckled and asked if that was really the right way to address someone like him. Arthur replied that it all depended on what happened next. Virion smirked and promised to grant the boy's wish. Tesha, who had dozed off, unknowingly leaned her head on Arthur's shoulder. Virion quietly commented that she'd woken up very early, eager to ask about her new human friend's future. According to him, as the heir to the throne, Tesha had grown up in isolation. She'd been betrayed countless times by adults and even by children who once called themselves her friends. Over time, she'd built walls around her heart, distancing herself from others. But now, when she's with Arthur, she smiles. Genuinely. It's a smile Virion hadn't seen in a very long time. For that, he thanked Arthur. And Arthur, struck by the elder elf's sincerity, was surprised most adults wouldn't dare thank a child. That moment earned Virion the boy's trust. After some time, the carriage pulled up in front of a secluded house. Arthur couldn't help but wonder how important this person must be for a former king to travel so far just to visit them. Suddenly, Virion kicked the door and yelled for the old witch to come out. There was no response, so he leaned in, trying to listen through the door only to have it swing open right into his face. The woman on the other side scolded him for yelling outside her home. Virion introduced her as Rhenia Darkasson, a special mage and an old friend. Arthur recalled that a special mage wasn't bound to the usual 4 categories just like Alice. Virion explained that the sorceress might be able to grant Arthur's wish, and the boy thanked him sincerely. Wasting no time and with zero interest in being polite, Rhenia told the brats to get inside so they could begin the procedure. Inside, the home was crammed with books and not much else, making Arthur wonder what she could possibly do to help. Soon, the 4 of them gathered around a table, where a bowl of water sat waiting. Arthur explained that he'd come hoping to contact his parents, just like Grandpa had told him was possible. Rhenia laughed when she heard the kid call Virion Grandpa, teasing that the old man was going soft for letting anyone speak to him like that. Then, she revealed she was a seer. Using her powers, she realized Arthur truly was a special child. In fact, even she couldn't see certain parts of his inner self. Normally, she could glimpse fragments of a person's past and future. She asked if that was what Arthur had come seeking his future. But the boy, eyes lowered, said no. He just needed to know if his parents were alive and safe. With that, Rhenia instructed him to gaze into the water and focus on his mother and father, filling his mind with every detail he could remember. As he did, she cast a spell near his head and told him to speak to them the moment he saw them. In an instant, Arthur Lewin saw his mother, her reddish-brown hair glowing softly, her skin kissed by the sun, her presence warm and gentle. Then came his father, with those piercing blue eyes. At home, he was calm and kind, but out there, he was a charismatic leader and a formidable warrior. In the vision, Alice was serving Reynolds some stew, the same stew that reminded them of how much Arthur loved it. Alice mentioned that today was their son's birthday, and the memory of that day brought a wave of pain crashing down on her. The trauma of losing Arthur so suddenly still haunted them. After he disappeared, the grief hit hard. Durden even punched Ray in the face after seeing him drink too much, drowning in sorrow over his missing son. Still, time moved on. The carriage kept going. Life had to continue. Thanks to the success of their mission, Alice and Reynolds were highly respected in their community. They were even rewarded with a mansion for their contributions. What's more, Alice's pregnancy was progressing well, and the two of them were ready to heal, to move forward with a new life. After recalling those moments, Ray regrets asking Arthur to protect his wife and child, and both parents begin to cry. But then, Arthur speaks to them through elven magic, reassuring them he's alive in the Elenoir kingdom. As much as he wants to return home, he can't not yet. There's a strange condition affecting his chest, and he needs treatment before he can even think about leaving. Still, he promises it's nothing serious and swears he'll come back as soon as he recovers. Before ending the spell, Arthur pleads with his parents not to blame themselves for what happened. He insists he would have done the same thing. Even if they had begged him not to, he would have gone, even if it meant dying. He doesn't know when he'll be able to reach out again, so he begs them to take care of themselves and not to worry. When the connection fades, Alice and Ray hug each other tightly, smiling through the tears. Meanwhile, Arthur lets a single tear fall into the water basin. No matter what happened, it's a relief to know his parents are okay. Whatever comes next, he's already made up his mind, so he asks Virion to accept him as an apprentice. Hours later, they return to the royal palace. Tesha, once again, is trying to talk some sense into her father, urging him to stop being so stubborn. It was that human boy who saved her life, after all. If they turn him away now, the people will see the crown as ungrateful. Finally, Alduin caves. He allows Arthur to stay on the condition that there are no problems because of it. Virion steps in to reinforce that young Lewin will be under his personal supervision, and that the people must be informed. If anything happens, the responsibility will fall on him. And with that, even though he clearly disagrees, Alduin lowers his head to his father's judgment and accepts. So, the king himself goes to speak with Arthur and apologizes for how he's acted since the boy first arrived. He admits that ruling for so long has made him a bit set in his ways. Still, he thanks Arthur once again for saving his daughter and officially welcomes him to the kingdom. Queen Muriel adds her own apology and tells Arthur she hopes he'll see this place as his new home. Arthur tries to understand what made them change their minds so quickly. But when he looks at Tesha and Virion standing there beside them, he figures it out. Clearly, the king is too soft when it comes to his daughter, and powerless when it comes to his father. And speaking of pushing boundaries, Tesha says that if her father really feels sorry for how he treated her friend, then he should let her show him around the city. Alduin looks nervously at his wife, silently asking for help. Muriel just smiles in approval. And with that, Tesha finally gets her wish, taking Arthur on a tour through Elenoir, starting with the bustling public market that sprawled across much of the city, alive with people and packed with colorful tents filled with goods, food, and all sorts of surprises. For Arthur, this was his first time experiencing an elven region up close, and he was truly amazed. Tesha, full of energy, grabs him by the arm and drags him along. There's a bazaar nearby that sells delicious fruits and sweets, she says, and if they don't hurry, everything will be gone. But on the way, they bump into an elven child who recoils in disgust, claiming he's been contaminated by human germs. That spoiled brat even points at Arthur and says that, sure, maybe he's earned the favor of Lord Virion, but this kingdom is no place for monkeys like him. Keeping his cool, Arthur sees a golden opportunity to let his mischievous side out, no doubt influenced by all the time he spent with Tesha lately. As the kids' friends mock him, one particularly arrogant boy sneers that while the princess may have an impressive reputation, walking beside a human will surely tarnish her legacy. So, introducing himself with flair, he declares he is Faerith Ivsar II, and he would like to accompany Her Highness on her walk. Arthur pretends to be amazed. Wait, are you the famous Faerith Ivysaurus? The kid turns red with fury at the audacity of this filthy human. But Arthur doesn't back down. In fact, he doubles down, bowing mockingly before such a brilliant prodigy. Seeing these two getting away with their antics, Faerith finally loses it and challenges Arthur to a duel, vowing to defend the honor of his noble lineage. Tesha asks if he's really willing to throw hands with Lord Virion's apprentice, but Faerith stands firm. His father taught him never to let anyone mock him, no matter who they are. So, he wants to know, does Arthur accept? Or will he run off with his tail between his legs, just like the monkey he is? Though Arthur isn't exactly thrilled with the idea, he agrees to the duel, even if he had thought such battles were reserved for meaningful conflicts, not childish squabbles. And so, the fight begins, with Tesha acting as referee. Faerith charges in, shouting for Arthur to start praying. In response, Arthur calmly throws a single punch right to the face. The elf kid spins through the air and crashes to the ground in pain. Arthur's not even sure if he actually hit that hard. Faerith's friends rush to help him, but Tesha wastes no time. She grabs Arthur by the wrist and pulls him away. The tour must go on. Watching Tesha's glowing smile, Arthur finds himself even more captivated by this remarkable princess. Together, they explore all corners of the marketplace. Arthur sees shops and goods he'd never imagined back in human cities, regional delicacies, cultural trinkets, and even a library filled with elven literature he's thrilled to browse. After the long day, Tesha asks if he's excited for his first training session tomorrow. Arthur says he is, but the look on his face says otherwise. He remembers Lord Virian's words, the training will be strict. After all, Arthur chose to stay in this foreign land without his family's support. Discipline will be key, but if he can push through, the reward will be beyond worth it. For now, though, he doesn't need to worry about the pain in his monocore. As the memory came back to him, Arthur turned to Tesha and, with a smile, said he was genuinely excited. After all, it had taken a lot to get to this point, countless battles, years of training with his family. Thinking about everything he'd been through, he made a promise to himself. He would work hard to shape his own future. Seeing the determination in his clenched fist, the princess mirrored his gesture and vowed to give it her all as well, especially to make sure Arthur wouldn't leave her behind on this journey. But with that moment of resolve behind them, she suddenly admitted she was hungry, even though they had just eaten. The next day, Arthur met with his new master to begin his training routine. But before diving in, he paused for a moment of reflection. In his mind, time in this new world seemed to pass in the blink of an eye. He had grown stronger, wiser, but the road hadn't been easy. Every step had been marked by trials, and with each challenge overcome, the next seemed even tougher. Still, the only thing he could do was focus on the doors ahead of him. And that thought alone made him realize the future was going to be thrilling. 3 years later, Tesha woke Arthur up the painful way using magic. Furious, he groaned and asked if she could try being a little gentler next time. She rolled her eyes and said she had, at first. But since he never woke up, she had to switch tactics. Shortly after, the two watch the king and queen leave for a meeting. At the same time, Tesha hands her friend a sandwich for breakfast, joking that food always tastes better when it's given by a beautiful girl. Without missing a beat, Arthur takes a huge bite out of the stuffed bread and asks where this beautiful girl who made it is hiding. Later, as they're warming up for training, Virian complains that they showed up late today. He tosses each of them a wooden sword to start the day's exercise. As the two kids promise to take each other's heads off, the old elf reflects it's time for them to take the next step. Moments later, with Tesha sprawled out on the ground after the duel, the experienced elf begins a review on magic. According to the book he's reading, once a person stabilizes their mana, the foundation of all magic, they can then gain control over one of the 4 natural elements: fire, earth, water, or wind. The element someone can learn depends on their race. For example, elves are naturally attuned to wind, dwarves to fire and earth, and humans can potentially control all 4, though in the end, each person will usually bond with just one. That said, there are extremely rare cases where a human can actually wield all 4. Still lying on the ground, Tesha wonders aloud why Arthur doesn't train his body while using magic like she does. Virian answers flatly it's because the boy is still weak. His monocore contains the beast will. Right then, Arthur feels a sharp, searing pain in his chest. Virian explains that the beast will disrupts the balance between the body and the monocore, which is what causes the pain. When he hears the word beast, Arthur's mind starts racing, imagining what it could mean. Virian tells him that the first step is to assimilate mana throughout his body. Tesha, meanwhile, teases him, saying the real reason he's like this is because he just got whooped in their duel. Arthur groans back that anyone would be in pain after taking a hit from this princess. He then reflects, when an elf awakens to their mana at the age of 10, it's considered a sign of great talent, and Tesha awakened even earlier, at 9. Since then, she's trained with him every day. Seeing that Arthur still has energy left, Virian decides it's time to awaken the beast will within him. If they succeed, the boy won't have to suffer anymore, and he could even become a beast tamer. With that, the master raises his right hand and begins casting a fire spell that travels forward, reaching the boy's mana core the moment Varian touches his chest. But the moment he does, something unexpected happens. The fire spell spirals out of control, exploding and throwing both elves backward. When the chaos settles, a glowing mark appears just beneath Arthur's eye, then fades. The boy collapses, unconscious. Arthur is immediately taken back to the palace at dusk. He wakes up in bed to find Varian sitting beside him, clearly worried. The elf asks how he's feeling, and though Arthur is still a bit disoriented, he replies that he's fine. That's when Varian asks if he knows what the beast will really is. Arthur recalls the moment Sylvia revealed her true identity as a dragon. When he tells Varian about it, the elf's expression turns serious. He urges the boy not to tell anyone else because the will of a dragon is known to bring unexpected conflict. With that subject put aside, Varian reminds Arthur that he's scheduled to return home in 4 months. That catches the boy off guard. He thought he had another 2 years in Elenoir. Varian explains that a cultural exchange between the 3 kingdoms is about to take place. During this period, the gates to Xyrus City will be open. Arthur realizes that must be why the king and queen left earlier. But when the elf sees Arthur's distant expression, he asks what's wrong. He'll finally get to see his parents, after all. When the boy doesn't answer, Varian simply tells him to rest up. Tomorrow, the training will get even tougher. Arthur asks if Tisha knows about all this, and Varian says she probably already does. And in fact, at that very moment, the princess has just received the news from her parents. That night, Arthur lies awake thinking about the 4 months he has left in Elenoir when suddenly, the egg Sylvia gave him begins to crack and emit a strange magical reaction. Through one of the cracks, he sees a glowing eye peering out, startling him. Then, at last, the egg hatches, revealing a tiny little creature. Arthur carefully picks up the sleepy baby dragon and tries to communicate, but all he gets in return is a bite to the arm that leaves a burn. Then, something extraordinary happens. A magical crest appears above the burn and immediately soothes the pain. A moment later, the little dragon begins to speak inside Arthur's mind, making him think, at first, that someone else is in the room. He decides to name her Sylvie, in honor of her mother. She seems to really like the name. Still overwhelmed by everything that's happened, Arthur stares at the crest on his arm, wondering what it could mean. And at the same time, he can hardly believe it. He's a father at just 8 years old. Exhausted, he drops his head onto the pillow and Sylvie, of course, curls up right beside him. One thing's for sure, his parents are going to be shocked when they hear the news. The next morning, Tesha shows up to wake her friend with her usual grace and charm. But the moment she pulls off his blanket, she's met with a surprise, a dragon lying beside him. Arthur jolts awake at her scream, but it's not a scream of terror. It's pure excitement at seeing such an adorable creature just begging for a hug it clearly doesn't want. Right away, Sylvie can tell, this elf girl is going to be a handful. Later on, while the 3 of them were walking through the forest on their way to training, Tesha kept calling out to Sylvie like she was a pet, but the little dragoness growled back and tucked herself under Arthur's chin for protection. When they arrived at the training grounds, Varian nearly had a heart attack seeing that the dragons had already awakened, and that it was not only training, but walking on all 4s. Still, knowing no one would believe it was a real dragon, the old master quickly told Arthur to just say Sylvie was a rare mana beast. Simple as that. Now, about today's training. Since Arthur had become a beast tamer, he needed to train both his mana core and his beast core. And as everyone knows, the best way to sharpen your skills is through real combat. Without warning, the sensei unleashed a devastating whirlwind of power, and in a blink, the seasoned elf transformed into a giant, shadowy creature. Varian didn't hold back. He darted with terrifying speed, appearing behind Arthur like he had teleported. Drenched in sweat, Arthur threw up his hands in surrender, begging for a break. Honestly, his master's current form was enough to traumatize the poor kid for life. When Varian finally reverted to his usual elven form, Arthur admitted he could barely sense the old man's presence. Varian explained that the Shadow Panther was an extremely advanced combination of wind and sound manipulation, a form of high magic. But like all powerful things, it came with weaknesses. In this case, it drained an absurd amount of mana. With that said, the master returned to regular training and handed Arthur a wooden sword. Days went by in this rhythm of relentless development, and Arthur eventually reached mastery over the will of the beast. Even more impressive, ever since he began tapping into his beast power, that unbearable pain in his chest never returned. His body had adapted so well that he hardly even felt the toll of the endless training he endured daily. Of course, every now and then, Arthur Lewin was allowed to just be a normal kid alongside his best friend. One of those moments came when he and Tesha went down to the city during the exchange festival, though the princess seemed a little irritable for some reason. Coincidentally, Arthur bumped into the most self-important elf in the entire kingdom of Elenoir, Faerith Ifsar II. Problem was, Arthur didn't remember who he was, which left Faerith absolutely livid in front of his two companions. To jog the kid's memory, the elf challenged Arthur to a rematch. Cut to the next scene, Faerith laid out flat on the ground, nose bleeding, totally wrecked. Just like Faerith's friends, the crowd watched the scene unfold in stunned silence. Tesha reminded Arthur who that arrogant loudmouth was. Once it clicked, Arthur politely extended a hand to help Faerith up. Begrudgingly, the elf swallowed his pride and shook it. One of Faerith's friends joked that this had all just been an elaborate plan to make friends with the human, and that Arthur could call him Faefi, since that's what everyone else did. Mortified, Faerith got even more annoyed for being exposed like that. Arthur, amused, asked if they were part of the exchange program too. Faerith, puffed with arrogance, claimed they were selected on merit alone to serve as goodwill ambassadors. His friend quickly corrected him, saying only high-status kids had been given that role, throwing Faerith under the bus without hesitation. With that in mind, Arthur guessed Tesha must have been selected for the same reason. The princess looked down, visibly embarrassed. Faerith then made a snide comment about how they couldn't afford to let the feeble princess get lost again. That was the last straw. Furious, Tesha decked him with a punch so powerful, he practically became a new star in Elenoir's sky. When he crashed back to the ground, people genuinely worried the guy had died. Arthur quickly pulled his friend away from the crowd. Once they were alone, he scolded her for not acting more like a proper princess. In another life, where he'd once watched a man's family executed before his eyes, Arthur knew he wouldn't have dared say something like that. Tesha began to cry, heartbroken that Arthur was leaving soon. But she also complained that Faerith was acting just like her father. She called Arthur a geezer and ran off. That night, Arthur went to her room and invited her for a walk in the woods, hoping to make peace. Eventually, they reached a restricted area, but Tesha promised it would be worth it. As they ventured deeper, a few horned wolves appeared, adding an eerie beauty to the moonlit forest. Later, they moved out of the dense woods and set up a small campfire in an open field. Tesha was practically falling asleep on her feet. She pretended she wasn't, of course, but it was obvious she could barely keep her eyes open. At one point, she even mistook a tree for a monster. Arthur teased her, saying she was still scared of ghosts, but Tesha insisted it was just the cold and then threw what looked like 9 pounds of firewood onto the flames. She asked what the human kingdom was like, but Arthur couldn't give her a clear answer. He'd only spent a short time there, after all. Then, softly, Tesha admitted she wished he could stay in the Elven lands forever. But before she could say anything more, she drifted off completely. The next morning, Arthur finished packing for the long-awaited cultural exchange. The kids gathered at a park to begin their journey. Arthur received a special compass engraved with the Aralith crest from his master, so he wouldn't lose his way again, and so he'd have a way back to Elenoir someday. Curious, he asked where Tesha was. Her parents glanced at each other with a somber expression. Moments later, the magical portal to the Elven realm opened. Arthur stood near it, alongside Faerith and his group. Then, out of nowhere, Tesha came running, shouting his name, Artie. She tripped and fell to her knees. Arthur rushed over and offered her his hand with a gentle smile. Desperate, she begged him to eat well during the trip. He wrapped her in a hug and reassured her that he would. He told her he'd miss her dearly. Choked up by his words, Tesha hugged him tighter, tears streaming down her face, and whispered the same. And so, after a long journey to the floating city of Xyrus, Arthur stepped out of the carriage, leaving behind the other children who had traveled with him. Without wasting a moment, he grabbed his bags and headed straight toward a house. Before knocking on the door, he He took a deep breath, bracing himself to finally reunite with his parents after all this time. He was greeted by a little girl who froze in fear at the sight of the boy. At that moment, Alice and Reynolds rushed over, chasing after their daughter Eleanor, who had run off in the middle of lunch. And that's when Arthur's parents saw their son. After so many years apart, after a few seconds of disbelief, realizing they were actually looking at their son, the parents rushed in and hugged the boy tightly. Eleanor, already showing strength at such a young age, turned to her mother and told her not to cry. The moment the girl called Alice Mom, Arthur was instantly transported back to the day of the carriage attack, when his father had told him to grab his mother and run as fast as he could. Arthur had said he was strong enough to stay and fight, but Ray insisted he use that strength to protect Alice, who, by the way, was pregnant at the time. Arthur knelt down in front of his sister and gently said her name. That's when Lisa explained that he was Eleanor's older brother, and the little girl stared at him in wide-eyed amazement as she tried to process it. Once inside, everyone sat down to talk. The mother wanted to know how her son was doing, especially since he'd been sick the last time they had spoken. When Arthur assured her he was fine, she immediately jumped to the next question: had he been eating properly? Ray chuckled at the mini interrogation. Lisa reminded Eleanor how often she used to talk about her big brother before bed. And though the little girl was still stunned by the surprise, Arthur gently tried to comfort her, telling her how happy he was to finally meet his baby sister. When the excitement died down, Arthur shared everything that had happened. Well, almost everything. Even though he trusted his parents, he left out the part about Sylvia. In short, he explained that he'd survived the fall thanks to a mix of luck and subconscious use of magic. He told them how he met Tess and how he'd recovered in the kingdom of Elenoir. The illness he'd had in his chest, that had been caused by his unstable mana core, triggered by awakening too early. Fortunately, that was no longer an issue and would never come back. Still, keeping this secret hurt more than the illness ever did. But revealing the truth before he was strong enough would put everyone at risk. Reynolds finally noticed the little creature perched on his daughter's head and asked who this new friend was. Arthur explained that he had found a mana beast nest during his travels. The mother of that creature, Sylvie, had died, and Arthur had taken in the baby. Eleanor was instantly captivated by the adorable creature, and the parents were just happy to see their son safe and healthy after all this time. By the way, Ray wanted to know what stage Arthur's mana core had reached, just to compare his own progress. But Lisa scolded him for asking something like that right after their son had just returned. Speaking of which, Arthur asked what his father had been up to. Ray said he got a job at the Helstia auction house, proudly announcing that he was now their head of security. Arthur, teasing his dad for more than just his grown-out beard, asked about his mana core stage, and Ray revealed that he'd reached Deep Orange 2 years ago. Arthur was impressed. In order from lowest to highest, mana colors go: black, red, orange, yellow, silver, and white. Each color has 3 stages: deep, standard, and light. Since Ray was an augmenter, he'd improved physically and climbed up a few levels. Arthur then shared that he'd reached light red just 1 step behind his dad, which absolutely blew Ray's mind. His son didn't even have armpit hair yet. Still, he was thrilled with Arthur's progress and insisted they train in the backyard immediately. And at that moment, the only thing Arthur could think was how good it felt to be home again. But their reunion was suddenly interrupted by the arrival of a man, a woman, and a child. The man didn't even knock, just barged right in. Arthur figured he had to be a family friend. And he was right. Ray introduced him as Vincent Helstia, owner of the auction house and Ray's boss. Beside him stood his wife, Tabitha. Arthur politely introduced himself, and Vincent was taken aback by the boy's manners, joking that he didn't seem like Reynolds' kid at all. Tabitha introduced their daughter as Lilia, and you could feel the spark of tension from a mile away, but not between Lilia and Arthur, between Lilia and Sylvie. Finally, Reynolds confessed that the house actually belonged to Vincent, and apologized in advance for the mess they were about to make outside. And sure enough, Ray and Arthur stepped out into the backyard for a long overdue sparring match. Vincent couldn't believe they were really doing this right now, but as soon as Ray started stretching, it was clear he meant business. Curious, Vincent asked if it was true that Arthur's core was already light red. Because if it was, that meant he'd awakened at 8 years old super early, and had already climbed 3 stages. Lisa said there was no reason for Arthur to lie. Tabitha, already sensing her husband's excitement, pulled him aside so they could watch from a safe distance. Still in disbelief, Vincent added that even the 11 and 12-year-old prodigies at the prestigious Xyrus Academy could barely reach deep red. Hearing all this, Arthur quietly thought to himself that he only hadn't reached the next stage because he hadn't had much time to train after receiving Sylvia's will. In other words, the kid was about to steamroll future enemies like a freight train. And finally, the duel began. Ray made it clear that Dad's still in top shape, but Arthur wasn't backing down either. He said he was just as ready. Time to put the talk to the test. Both opponents dashed toward each other, circling with practiced eyes, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Interestingly, their fighting styles were similar, and once the clash began, Arthur immediately showed he was far beyond what you'd expect from someone his age. But when Ray blocked one of his punches, he smirked and said, "That all you got?" Fueled by the challenge, Arthur leapt back and launched another strike, a heavy kick, this time catching Ray by surprise, even though he managed to block it just in time. After another exchange of blows, Arthur takes a step back and asks his father what he thought. Ray admits the kid caught him off guard for a moment, but from now on, he says, he's fighting for real. As he says that, flames begin to swirl around his left hand, and Arthur reflects on how sorcerers in this world have an affinity for specific elements. Conjurers learn early on which element they're compatible with and gain control over it, be it fire, water, earth, or air. Amplifiers, however, struggle to distinguish that so clearly. They can only determine their element after reaching a certain level, and Reynolds, of course, is well past that stage. Speaking of him, the flames that had been dancing around his hand now engulf his entire body. As the two charge at each other and the fight resumes, Arthur starts thinking back how, in his past life, Kai worked similarly to mana. It was the life force behind everything, and unlike elemental magic, it allowed for total autonomy. Lack of compatibility made things harder, sure, but the payoff was greater. That, he thinks, is probably how amplifiers work in this world. Since being born here, luck hasn't exactly been in short supply for Arthur. It's what brought him this far. With that thought, golden energy bursts from his hands, leaving his father stunned. Arthur makes it clear, from this point on, he's not holding back. Everyone watching is left in shock at the sudden surge of power. But once the surprise wears off, Reynolds gives a slight grin and braces for his opponent's next move. As Arthur closes in with incredible speed, the two collide, fists glowing with magic, clashing in a battle for dominance through sheer force. Ray manages to knock Arthur back with an elbow strike. The boy barely blocks in time, but the blow still sends him flying. Even so, he lands on his feet, showing impressive balance and recovery. Back in his own head, Arthur realizes his training with Virion in a Lenoir brought him to a whole new level, and the memories of Kai from his previous life helped more than he could have imagined. He remembers one day in training, the elf told him he'd come a long way with a fire element. Smiling, Virion said it was time to go even further. With that moment in mind, Arthur summons crackling bolts of electricity from within, ripping through the ground like whips and igniting the area in blazing flames. His father is left even more stunned, witnessing this advanced fire magic. Brimming with confidence, the kid smirks and says he's still got a few tricks up his sleeve. Then he reveals one, manipulating the water from the backyard fountain and launching a torrent of it toward his father to snuff out the flames. Reynolds manages to dodge just in time and push the water away with his magic, but he ends the battle there, if only to compliment his son's cleverness. Naturally, he wants to know when this little squirt picked up all these tricks. Arthur, beaming, says it hasn't been long, but he still needs more control. Everyone around them is left speechless by the prodigy Arthur has revealed himself to be. After the show, Vincent invites everyone for a drink. The first thing he does once they sit down is ask if Ray has any idea just how bright his son's future looks. Ray nods, of course he knows. Arthur awakened his mana at the age of 3. Lies adds that he even blew up their house during the process, and Ray bursts into laughter at the memory. Fired up, Vincent invites Arthur to enroll at Xyrus Academy. Ray can hardly believe it, his son might soon be attending the most renowned and competitive magic school on the continent. To top it off, Tabitha makes it clear they'd be willing to invest in Arthur's future. His potential is simply too great to ignore. Lies hesitates. Arthur's only 8 years old, and she's not even sure how the academy would react. But Vincent reveals he knows the headmistress personally. He could have a word with her. Even so, before anything else, Arthur steps in to say it's been a long time since he saw his family, and he just finished sparring with his dad, so with all due respect, he'd like to rest a bit. While Vincent sits at the table feeling guilty for pushing the subject, Arthur wanders the mansion's hallways, head low and thoughts heavy. That's when Lilia shows up, warning him he'll end up lost in the basement if he keeps going that way, but if he wants, she knows a better place. Arthur has no idea what she's talking about, but since he has nothing else to do, he follows her to a part of the house filled with servants. With a questionable sense of humor, one of the older ladies jokes, asking if this is the little brat who torched her garden. A butler quickly clarifies she's just messing around. Arthur, a little embarrassed, can't figure this girl out. She hadn't said a word when they first met, and now she's suddenly outgoing and talkative. She even asks if there's still some of that greasy duck meat left. The older maid scolds her, saying she's gaining weight and worrying her mother. Lilia gets annoyed at Maria's nagging, while another maid whispers to Arthur that the girl always comes here when she's stressed out. Her parents dream of seeing her awaken as a mage, even though neither of them are. Sure, Lilia wants that too, but it's a lot of pressure for a kid. That night, Arthur's parents come to his room. They mention how much he's grown physically, but no matter what, he'll always be their son. Deep down, he's still the same boy, smart, kind, and destined to become one of the greatest mages of all time. With that, they say goodnight and let him rest. Before leaving, Ray says Vincent was just concerned when he brought all that up at the table. Arthur nods. He knows the Helstias meant no harm. The next day, Arthur heads to the guild hall and reunites with the entire Twin Horns party, the same group that was there during the carriage attack, the one that tore him away from everyone. The first to pull him into a tight hug is Angela Rose. Arthur notes that Durden Walker looks even bigger than the last time they met, and Durden says the same about him. Out of nowhere, Jasmine Flamesworth runs her hand over the boy, just to make sure he's really alive. Once she confirms he is, she hugs him and immediately blames herself for what happened. Helen Shard breaks down in tears, and even Adam Crench, who'd been grumbling about everyone getting emotional, ends up shedding a tear himself. Later, the group tells Arthur that they had traveled all the way to Ediston, the border city, but picked up a few jobs on their way back, and decided to swing by Xyrus to check in on their young friend to see how he was doing after all this time. Reflecting on that, Arthur realizes something. He doesn't know much about the Dicathan continent, let alone the kingdom of Sapin. So maybe becoming an adventurer would be a good way to understand the world as it really is. Still, there's something holding him back. Something that keeps one foot planted in hesitation. Elsewhere in the house, quietly removed from the conversation, Lilia sits alone, lost in thought, weighed down by something of her own. In the next scene, we see Arthur in his room, focusing so intensely that time itself seems to stand still around him. A ball that should have hit the ground long ago only drops when the boy can no longer maintain his concentration. The effort is so extreme, sweat drips down his face, and he collapses onto the floor, exhausted, stunned that the time freeze lasted such a short while. Despite being out of breath, the only thing running through his mind is keeping up his training pace to protect the people he loves. After all, that's why he's here. Meanwhile, Sylvie shows up with her usual charm, and, in a way only she can, reminds Arthur that he's truly home. The feeling fills him with joy. It's been a long time since he last saw his parents, and now, he even has a baby sister. The only downside? The little one was reeking when she got hugged by her master. Without wasting a second, Arthur rushes the tiny dragon off for a bath to deal with the serious stench. As he scrubs his pet, his thoughts drift to the Helstia family. From the looks of it, their auction house business is clearly doing well. That aside, he recalls how her parents wanted their daughter to become a mage, though the girl herself had no interest in that path. Once the bath is over, Sylvie is sparkling clean again, good as new. But she's not the only one who needs freshening up. According to the women of the house, who suddenly barge into the young man's room, Arthur himself could use some grooming. Naturally, the poor kid has no idea how to react to the situation. Things start to make sense once he's dragged off to a city hairdresser to deal with the wild mop on his head. The moment the stylist sits Arthur in the chair, he sees it, a diamond in the rough just waiting to be polished. After the haircut, Arthur returns to the girls and leaves them speechless. His new look oozes style and swagger. Curious, he asks why he's being trimmed up like this, and the ladies explain, the Helstia auction house is frequented by nobles and royalty. So, Arthur simply couldn't keep walking around like some stray mutt. On that note, Tabitha offers to show him a bit of Xyrus City. Elena asks to tag along with her big bro, and Lilia admits she felt a tiny bit jealous after all. The little girl had been glued to her before Arthur arrived. Still, she compliments his outfit, not surprising, since she picked it out herself. So, the group heads out for a stroll through the city. Arthur and Elena get the chance to explore every corner of that prestigious and intriguing place. Outside a school, a few boys toss a white band onto Arthur's head. He turns, confused, and asks who they are. Lilia explains, they're students from Xyrus Academy of Magic, probably just showing off. Around here, anyone wearing that preppy uniform is treated like royalty. Arthur tries to figure out why these guys would mess with him for no reason. But before he can get too deep in thought, something unusual grabs his attention, a strong, radiant aura nearby. He follows the energy and ends up face to glass with a store window, staring at a glowing purple orb. Tabitha explains that it's a beast core, a magical core extracted from a mana beast that strengthens whoever owns it. Hearing that, Arthur reflects on how elves typically don't deal in these kinds of items. Tabitha adds that the price depends on how powerful the core is. If it holds the beast's will, it can fetch up to 100 gold coins. With that kind of money, she says, her family could live comfortably in their homeland for 250 years. As it happens, similar items will be up for auction soon, and she promises to let Arthur touch one of the cores. Lilia hints that she'd like to join in, too, but her mother quickly makes it clear. Just because someone has a beast core doesn't mean they'll awaken magical powers. Besides, they can't afford something that expensive for a child. Lilia argues that there are cheaper cores at the weapons shops, but Tabitha sticks to her decision and shuts the conversation down. Arthur feels her friend's disappointment and can't help but sympathize. Later, the group sits down for a meal, but Arthur remains visibly bothered. He keeps thinking about how Lilia was treated and how differently she acted afterward. From what he can tell, Tabitha doesn't want her daughter rushing the awakening process, and maybe what's really hurting Lilia is the heavy weight of her father's expectations. Deep in thought, Arthur suddenly sees Lilia leave the table and slip into a nearby alley alone. He follows her and finds her inside a weapon shop, eyes locked on two small beast cores like a starving dog eyeing meat on a spit. Lilia's thinking she might just be able to afford one with her allowance. Arthur walks up and gently warns her even if she buys one, it won't guarantee she can use magic. Still, Lilia's determined to try, and she doesn't hide it. She reaches for one of the stones, but Arthur stops her and asks, "What if it doesn't work?" She replies that she's already failed multiple times, and one more setback isn't going to break her. According to her, Arthur doesn't understand because he was born special unlike her, who isn't even allowed to touch a beast core by her own parents. With that, Lilia tries to walk away, only to bump into the spoiled brats from the Magic Academy. Of course, they're quick to make a fuss over the accident. The shop owner hears the noise and steps out from the back to see what's going on. But he instantly backs off when he sees who's involved and basically lets the kids do whatever they want. Feeling emboldened, one of them summons fire, ready to escalate things, while another makes it clear that there's no way out. Arthur instinctively pushes Lilia behind him, realizing there's no peaceful way to resolve this, so it's time to act. He channels his signature magic ready for a fierce defense. However, just then, Tabitha and Alice show up at the shop and immediately tell the kids to lower their weapons, or rather, their spells. The shop owner grumbles, pointing out that she's speaking harshly to students from the academy, the kind of kids who could easily ruin his business. But Tabitha makes it clear, not even these little brats can hurt a Helstia girl and walk away without a scratch. As soon as they hear that last name, the boys freeze. They remember that's the family that donates a fortune to the academy every year. If the director found out they were messing with those people, she'd go ballistic. So, with their tails between their legs, they leave. Once everything is calm again, Arthur gets ready to head out too, but Lilia gently grabs him by the sleeve, not ready to let him go just yet. Later that afternoon, they return home. Tabitha tells Vincent about the scuffle with the academy boys. Alice admits she was more worried about those boys than her own son, and Lilia quietly apologizes to her father. Vincent responds with warmth and understanding. He reassures them that this won't stand in the way of Arthur getting into the Academy of Magic. After all, the Helstia family is one of its biggest donors, and as the saying goes, who pays the piper calls the tune. Lilia lowers her head. Then she asks, almost in a whisper, if her father is sending Arthur to the academy in her place. Vincent tries to explain that it's not like that, but she doesn't believe him, not even for a second. In front of everyone, she blurts out that she hates him. Not long after, Arthur goes to call Lilia for dinner, but she doesn't respond when he knocks on her bedroom door. Down the hallway, he notices a butler who greets him from a distance with a quiet nod. Then the scene shifts. We see Lilia as a little girl, practically glowing with excitement the day she found out she'd one day attend the Xyrus Academy of Magic to become a mage. But the years went by, and her magic never awakened. It took a heavy toll on her. Her mother and father did their best to comfort her, telling her that sometimes it just takes longer, and that one day she'd discover her potential. But time was merciless. And now that she's heard Arthur is going to that school, her self-esteem has hit rock bottom. Still haunted by those thoughts, Lilia hears Arthur calling her. He guessed she might be in the servants' basement, and sure enough, that's where he finds her. Arthur wants to apologize, as if it were somehow his fault for having everything while Lilia had nothing. But before he can say anything, it's Lilia who apologizes. She admits she felt jealous of him. After all, he stole the spotlight she used to have. Her father now treats Arthur like some sort of prodigy, and in doing so, pushed his own daughter aside. Lilia says it's her own fault for not awakening her magic, and that her parents are tired of waiting. Arthur knows that feeling. That cold, sinking sensation of being trapped in your own darkness, and the empathy he feels for her sparks an idea something that might turn things around. He gently touches her face and reminds her how hard she's been trying, not the kind of effort someone should throw away now. Once he has her full attention, he tells her about a girl who lifted his spirits when he was separated from his parents. As he conjures an image of his mother surrounded by magic, he explains that this girl, the one who cheered him up, was the one who showed him those flowers, her favorite ones. He tells her that her parents do see her efforts, that the curiosity her father shows toward him is the same kind of excitement his own parents had when Eleanor showed promise. It's not that Arthur is more important. He just showed up out of nowhere and caught their attention, that's all. Feeling calmer, Lilia admits that her father only wants her to become a mage because he believes it'll make her happy. That's why he donates so much to the academy. But the pressure that came from her, she put that weight on herself. Arthur listens carefully, but in his heart, he knows it's not that simple. The more Vincent pushes for this dream, the more others start piling their own expectations on her. So, he asks the question that really matters: does she even want to use magic? Later on, Arthur goes to her parents and tells them that he sent Lilia to the same place where he trained, so she could finally start learning magic and chasing her dream. Her parents are thrown into panic, but Arthur tries to explain. The place is safe, she'll be fine, and more importantly, it's what she wanted. Then Vincent finds a letter Lilia left behind. In it, she says she doesn't want to be a burden to them anymore, not until she learns how to use magic. She promises to return only once she's become a great mage. As he reads her words, Vincent drops to his knees. He realizes how much pressure he placed on his daughter, how he pushed her so far that she felt she had to run away. He was the one who planted the belief in her head that happiness only comes from becoming a mage. Through tears, he says that it's okay if she doesn't want to become a mage, that he loves her no matter what. Just then, Arthur asks Lilia what she thinks about that, and the girl steps out from behind a nearby door. She was in the house the whole time. Arthur apologizes for the dramatic stunt, admitting that he knows losing a child is worse than death for a parent. After all, he made his own parents suffer in a similar way. But Vincent insists he's the one who should apologize. First, for trying to get Arthur into the academy the very day he returned, and second, for making his daughter believe she had no choice. He tells her she doesn't need to go to the academy if she doesn't want to. He'll find a way to make her happy, with or without magic. But Lilia responds with determination. She does want to join the academy. She still wants to learn magic. Despite everything, that dream still burns inside her. What she truly wants is to become a mage who can make others happy just like Arthur does. Moved by her words, Vincent and Tabitha wrap her in a tight embrace. And Arthur? He simply looks at her and promises, without hesitation, that he will awaken her mana. With that, he sits Lilia and Elena down on the living room rug, their backs facing each other. Tabitha acknowledges the young man's talent, but admits she's never heard of the method he seems to be attempting. Arthur then announces that the first step involves the girl's breathing, because when you breathe in a focused, meditative way, mana becomes easier to sense. The two are told to close their eyes and concentrate on their breathing until they see a light appear in the darkness. After a few seconds, Elena spots a light, but it quickly vanishes when she loses focus. Lilia, on the other hand, is disappointed she still hasn't seen anything. So, Arthur places his palms gently on each girl's back and channels a bit of magic to assist their breathing. With his help, Lilia begins to see a soft, glowing light delicate, like the flower he showed her. Next, we see Arthur and Lilia celebrating her awakening in the basement, joined by the household staff. Maria, thrilled by the moment, made sure to prepare a hearty, greasy dish to spoil the girl who's just taken a major step toward her greatest dream. Arthur explains that with intense training, it'll probably take 2 or 3 years for the energy to stabilize, which makes Lilia curious. What kind of element will she be able to use in the future? Arthur responds with a playful look, and the two burst out laughing together. Meanwhile, a hooded man is approaching Xyrus, surrounded by knights armored from head to toe. He seems quite eager for the entertainment waiting at the auction house. That same night, Arthur found himself standing before the Helstia auction house, and he was blown away by its sheer size. Alice, a bit uneasy, worried whether the kids would manage to behave in a place like this. But Tabitha brushed it off, saying there was no need to stress, just relax and enjoy the evening. Inside, Arthur couldn't help but think, this is the night every aristocrat and adventurer has been waiting for. All around the entrance hall, dozens of impeccably dressed guests filled the room with chatter about business and opportunities. It was the perfect chance to buy rare items collected by Vincent and other renowned gatherers. Elena and Lilia lit up at the sight of gleaming beast cores on display, while Arthur's eyes wandered to a creepy statue of what looked like a semi-human deity. Amidst the commotion, Reynolds Lewin warned his subordinates to stay sharp and not mess anything up. Arthur and his sister found it amusing how their dad looked so much more serious in uniform. Alice chimed in, saying he'd probably be happy to hear that. Later on, the event moved to the grand auditorium for the long-awaited auction. First to speak was none other than Vincent Helstia himself, introducing the VIP guests in attendance. Leading the group, His Majesty, King Blaine Glader of Sapin. Behind him, Queen Priscilla, Prince Curtis, and Princess Kathleen. Arthur figured Blaine must be a well-loved ruler, judging by the warm reception he received. The host then officially declared the opening of the 10th anniversary of the Helstia Auction House, an event that stirred distant memories of Arthur's past life. Outside the mansion, guards, security teams, and adventurers stood at attention, tasked with protecting a festival packed with high-profile figures. Inside, a sword crafted by a famed blacksmith was brought out, its blade designed to channel electricity through mana, making it sharper and able to paralyze an opponent. The starting bid, 50 gold coins. In no time, the wealthy guests were already battling over it. Arthur wondered if he could fuse his element into a weapon like that, assuming it was compatible. The sword sold for 53 gold coins. Next up on stage, a pair of masks that made Arthur let out a sigh. His mother asked if something had caught his eye, but he just shrugged. Everything was way too expensive. No way he could afford a single thing. Then he noticed Sylvie was gone. Elsewhere in the mansion, the little dragon wandered the halls without a care in the world, until she ran into a menacing man in a red robe, holding a heavy scepter adorned with ornate decorations. Back in the auction room, the next item was a world lion cub and a rank mana beast. Prince Curtis eagerly turned to his father, saying he wanted the creature. Vincent announced the opening bid, 200 gold coins. Without hesitation, someone offered 300. The numbers kept climbing, 400, 450, until the king silenced the room with a crushing bid of 1,000 gold coins. The crowd was left speechless. Classic, turned down for what moment? Meanwhile, Arthur kept searching for his dragon companion. He turned a corner and finally heard that familiar little chirp Sylvie always made. On stage, King Blaine stepped forward to claim his prize after offering the highest bid. Vincent jokingly asked if he had any idea what to do with such a creature. The king replied that he would gift it to his son if the boy proved himself capable of taming the beast. Down one of the corridors, the red-robed man asked to inspect Sylvie's body. But just then, Arthur came running and found her. One look, and he knew that man was a royal conjurer. He'd been standing behind the royals earlier. Clearly not someone to pick a fight with. Trying to stay calm, Arthur asked if he could take his partner and leave. The conjurer, unfazed, said the mana beast wasn't for sale and stared at Sylvie like she was some prized artifact, not a living being. Sylvie, spooked by the creepy old man, darted up onto Arthur's shoulder. But the man didn't take kindly to being dismissed. He told Arthur to hand over the creature he'd been searching for, a pet like her, to unlock its full potential. To threaten him, the conjurer hurled a blast of flame at the wall beside Arthur. The boy didn't even flinch. Again, the man cast the same spell, insisting this was for the future of the nation. Arthur tried to walk away, still keeping it cool. But the conjurer didn't back down. He made it crystal clear defying royalty would have consequences. That made Arthur stop in his tracks. Smirking, the mage said he'd make the boy's parents pay for this, and that was the last straw. Arthur slowly turned around and told the man to repeat what he'd just said. At the same time, a dark, ominous energy started pulsing from Arthur's body. His eyes lit up with a fierce blue glow like beast cores burning from within. The pressure exploded outward, flooding the entire mansion. Glass displays in the auditorium shattered. Vincent dropped to his knees, gasping for air. A thick red haze filled the air. King Blaine could feel the overwhelming bloodlust radiating through the ballroom. He stood up and demanded that whoever was responsible step forward. Meanwhile, Arthur had left the royal conjurer shaking in his boots. Realizing he'd gone too far, Arthur quickly reined in the scarlet mist blanketing the estate. Outside, Reynolds called on the twin horns to protect the civilians. Inside, the king approached the head of security and held him responsible for failing to catch the intruder. He ordered disciplinary action against Reynolds. The conjurer, now back with the king, tried to smooth things over, said there had been no real damage, so maybe it was time to show mercy. But when he noticed the kid and the dragon again, he couldn't help but add that he would make a far better caretaker for that mana beast. As for the sorcerer, the king reveals that Sebastian has served in the royal guard for many years, having saved his loved ones more times than he can count. And thinking of a fitting reward for such loyal service, Blaine suggests that the child's companion might be a suitable gift. However, Reynolds objects, stating that he had no part in his son's adoption of the creature, and therefore has no right to decide what should be done with the mana beast. So, Blaine turns to Arthur and asks him directly what he thinks. The boy looks the king straight in the eye. One of the guards quickly reminds him that you're never supposed to stare at a superior like that, and Alice apologizes for her son's disrespect. But Arthur, politely, says he's grateful for the generous offer, yet he must disagree with His Majesty, because there's no way he could ever replace a partner like Sylvie. The guards bristle at the boy's audacity, while the king counters by offering him the world lion in exchange for the dragon. He points out that reptilian beasts take far longer to mature, and even then, they're not nearly as strong as predator beasts. Still, Arthur makes it clear he has no intention of selling or trading Sylvie, and that stubbornness begins to test the king's patience. He asks one last time if the boy will part with his companion. Even his mother joins in, urging Arthur to hand over the creature. But Arthur stands up and calmly asks, "How much gold would your majesty accept for his own children?" Because, as he reminds them, he's already refused the offer 3 times, but the king's pride simply won't allow him to take no for an answer. Stunned by the sheer nerve of the question, Sebastian orders 2 guards to seize the boy, but Arthur knocks both of them down with a single mana-charged punch. Convinced that the reptilian mana beast should belong to him, the royal conjurer raises his scepter and unleashes a powerful burst of fire magic. Alice watches in horror, fearing for her son's life. But just as the spell is released, time freezes. Every person in that grand hall is locked in place, everyone except Arthur Lewin and the conjurer. Arthur informs him that his spells won't work in this space. His right eye begins to glow, even more intensely than the last time. Then, without even laying a finger on him, Arthur snaps the man's leg. The conjurer screams in agony, begging for help, but Arthur tells him no one can hear him now, which makes this the perfect time to listen. Sebastian reminds him he's royalty, but Arthur calmly replies that it's the conjurer who should recognize the position he's in now. When the man catches a glimpse of a spectral dragon looming behind the boy, he completely panics and pleads for mercy. Then, just as suddenly, the time-freezing spell wears off, and Arthur collapses. The next day, Arthur wakes up in bed, realizing he overdid it. He remembers flashes of the battle between Sylvia and her enemy from the same race. He had managed to temporarily step outside the flow of time, but the price was steep. There's still much more training ahead. At that moment, his mother enters the room, her face lighting up the moment she sees him awake. Arthur asks what happened after he passed out, and Alice says everyone was in a panic. The doctor assured them he'd wake soon, though it took longer than she would have liked. Seeing her wipe away a tear, Arthur quietly apologizes for worrying her again. Later, while wandering through Xyrus's common market to clear his head, Arthur stops with his mother at a stall. Alice finds a lovely hair clip she's sure Elena would love and hands it to Arthur, telling him to say it's a gift from her big brother. And if he wants something too, all he has to do is ask. Hesitant, Arthur reminds her that they don't have much money, and with everything that happened, Reynolds could lose his job. But Alice gently tells him she's working now. She has a salary. As they walk together through the market, Arthur learns that Alice's creations have become popular among the nobles. Her goods are being sold in shops across the city. Tabitha even helped her make the connections that allowed her products to spread more easily through Xyrus. After they finish shopping, mother and son head back home with Arthur stuck carrying the mountain of things his mom just bought. Meanwhile, Reynolds is facing off with a man behind closed doors, making one thing clear: this isn't about money. His son was nearly killed. Just outside the room, Arthur and Alice arrive and ask what's going on. Adam and Durden, who've been eavesdropping, shush them, but Arthur walks in anyway, announcing to his dad that he's ready for today's training. The man speaking with Reynolds says that, on behalf of His Majesty, he's here to offer the royal family's sincerest apologies for what happened yesterday. But since an apology alone doesn't suffice, the king is prepared to offer compensation in gold for the minor incident. He also mentions that the 2 guards who attacked Arthur have been discharged. Still, Ray isn't satisfied, not when those men tried to kill a child. The royal envoy responds that the incident only happened because Reynolds failed in his duties as head of security. Before the tension boils over, Arthur steps in and admits he may have gone too far. And besides, he didn't even get hurt. Speaking of which, he asks what happened to Sebastian, the guy who had his leg broken. The envoy explains that the conjurer has been removed from his post and is undergoing treatment. He claimed Arthur was the one who broke his leg, but after an investigation, it was determined that the mana from the 2 guards' attacks had been reflected. That magical backlash is what caused the injury. In closing, the envoy reiterates that His Majesty is offering the gold as compensation, but that Reynolds should teach his son some manners. After all, not every king shows the mercy Blaine Glader did. And so, the Lewin family accepts the money, and the envoy takes his leave. As soon as he's gone, Adam and Durden burst into the room and start bawling like little kids. Arthur had made it through another wild mess this time, one that involved the king of Sapin himself. When night falls, Arthur lies in bed, quietly reflecting. He's just a child in this vast world, and that truth had been thrown in his face in a painful way. If he wants to stand against the power of nations, he'll have to rise to their level. At dawn, the boy walks toward Xyrus Academy of Magic. He pauses, watching the students scattered across the courtyard, dressed in crisp uniforms, elegantly parading their magical creatures. Then, he spots an owl gliding through the air, landing gracefully on the railing at the top of the stairs where he stands. Moments later, the bird takes off toward the forest, and something in Arthur tells him he should follow. Along the path, he comes across an old woman waiting, as if she knew he would come. Xyrus Academy was known for producing scholars, business leaders, royal guards, and military officers on a large scale, a prestigious institution every child dreamed of attending. And now, Arthur was standing face to face with the Academy's director, the very woman who ran the entire place. Curious to see whether Vincent had been exaggerating, she summoned a magical sphere, which shattered almost immediately. With that done, she calmly said it was time to begin the process. To her surprise, the boy didn't even flinch. Arthur, on the other hand, could feel an overwhelming force radiating from her. It was no wonder she held the title of the most powerful mage in the kingdom. If he could just show her a glimpse of his power, maybe she'd believe Vincent hadn't been bluffing. So, without hesitation, he released a heavy wave of wind magic and hurled rocks in her direction. She responded by freezing them mid-air and crushing them instantly. Arthur stood stunned, but he knew his wind element was still weaker compared to his earth or water magic. To raise the stakes, he launched an earth spell. It hit harder, but even so, the director dispelled it just as effortlessly using wind, the same element Arthur had just tried. A single bead of sweat slid down his face. He could barely believe she dodged that trick, and yet, a small grin crept onto his lips. He had one last move, and he was confident it would be enough. With fists engulfed in flames, Arthur charged forward. But before he could get close, a gust of wind formed a barrier and flung him back with brutal force. Having subdued the student, the director confirmed what she already suspected. Like many young talents, Arthur overestimated his own abilities. But still, she couldn't deny he had something special. Now, it was time for the final test. Without warning, she unleashed a surge of sound magic so violently that it nearly burst the boy's eardrums. Seconds later, she cut the spell short and announced that he had passed. She was intrigued enough to want to personally teach him how to refine his wind spells. She asked which elements he could use besides wind and earth, as he'd shown during their duel. Arthur confirmed he could use water as well. Looking deeper into his intentions, the director guessed there was more to this meeting than just a test, and she was right. Arthur Lewin admitted he'd sought her out because she had the power and influence he needed to protect his family. If she agreed to help him, he'd enroll at the academy and choose her as his mentor. She raised an eyebrow. Not even Sapin's ruling couple would dare propose a deal this bold. This kid had guts. Arthur, unfazed, added that he believed he deserved the position. In fact, he imagined she'd already been thinking the same thing. That said, he made it clear he'd only enroll once he was the same age as the other students. The director reminded him that would take another 3 years, and if he joined now, he could grow much stronger, much faster. But Arthur had other plans. He wanted to live his life to the fullest, and that meant becoming an adventurer, exploring the world, discovering its secrets. The academy could wait. Seeing how determined he was, the director agreed to the terms, but only if he could convince his family first. In the very next scene, Alice flat out refused. She called it absurd. In truth, she and Reynolds had learned of Arthur's wish to become an adventurer through Vincent, not from their own son, but that alone was enough to make her panic. Watching his parents argue like that, Arthur regretted not telling them himself. Ray tried to reason with her, asking her to at least hear their son out, but Alice didn't want to lose him again, not now, not so soon after getting him back. Still, Ray asked if maybe they could assign a guardian to go with him. That only made Alice angrier. No way. Absolutely not. She wouldn't let her son go off on another journey. At that point, Arthur stepped in. He clarified that it wasn't some grand adventure, he'd be able to come home whenever he wanted. What Vincent meant was that he simply wanted to see more of Dickathan. There was so much in this world he barely knew, and he wanted to discover it. Plus, he was curious to experience what it was like being an adventurer, just like his parents once were. That calmed Alice down a little. Arthur, meanwhile, admitted to himself that staying home training all day sounded incredibly boring compared to testing his skills in the real world. Of course, there was no way he'd say that to her face. Speaking of his mother, she brought up something else. She hadn't heard anything about his elemental abilities until now. She asked him not to keep secrets anymore. Wanting to avoid conflict, Arthur promised. But her words pierced him like stakes. He wished he could be honest truly, but reality was far more complicated than a simple promise. Ray chimed in, acknowledging that Alice had every right to be worried. The adventuring world was dangerous. But circling back to his earlier idea, he suggested again that they find a guardian to accompany Arthur. To find the right person, the family went to visit the Securas. Adam, however, instantly rejected the idea. Babysitting just wasn't his thing, especially when Arthur, in his words, could probably kill him in his sleep. Helen agreed, saying he always talked nonsense around the kid anyway. One by one, the rest of their companions chimed in, all rejecting the proposal and leaving Adam thoroughly embarrassed. Reynolds admitted he didn't have much to offer in return for the favor, but he'd give whatever he could to whoever accepted. Durden said they all wanted to be part of Arthur's growth. And then Jasmine raised her hand. Everyone stared in shock. Flamesworth, of all people, she was known for working solo even more than Adam. And now, she was volunteering. No one saw that coming. Reynolds had been certain that either Durden or Helen would volunteer. But when considering combat skills, maybe an augmenter was actually the best choice. After all, Durden's spells cover wide areas and are ideal for protecting large groups. And as Helen herself admits, she's not exactly great at keeping people safe. Adam adds that an augmenter like Jasmine could harness elemental magic, and she had reached the light orange level just last year, making her wind magic perfect for the job. So, while Durden promises to help whenever necessary, Jasmine Flamesworth is officially appointed as young Arthur's bodyguard. With one less thing to worry about, the Lewin family heads home and finds Lilia meditating at the entrance. Eleanor grumbles that her friend shouldn't be training without her, while Arthur notices something interesting. Lilia can now meditate without him projecting mana into her. His little sister, on the other hand, still has another 7 or 8 years before she'll awaken her own mana if she stays focused and committed, that is. Even so, Arthur kind of hopes she doesn't awaken too soon. Being the center of attention really messes with the process. After thinking about all this, the young prodigy asks if he can visit the auction house to pick out a sword, and his father agrees. Arthur makes his way there, looking for a weapon to use in the upcoming Adventurer Guild entrance exam. What he finds is a literal arsenal at his fingertips, an overwhelming sight that leaves him and the ever-loyal Sylvie staring in awe. Back at home, Alice begins to worry about the time and suggests they go pick him up, but Reynolds urges a little more patience. Their son needs time to choose the right gear. Standing before a rack of blades, Arthur eyes one sword suspiciously. He can hardly believe that out of all these choices none have felt right. Most of the soldiers in this world are augmenters, which means the majority of swords are two-handed. And even the one-handed ones tend to be massive, far too large for someone with a small, slender frame like his to wield during a high-stakes exam. Just as doubt begins to settle in, Sylvie tugs at his attention and nudges him toward a staff tucked away in a dusty corner. Arthur chuckles but explains that it's not really what he's looking for. Sylvie insists, so he picks it up, surprised by how heavy it feels. On closer inspection, despite its misleading appearance, Arthur realizes it might be one of those weapons that require elemental input to unsheath. With that in mind, he focuses his beast core, letting a warm energy surge from deep within and flow outward, channeling straight into the weapon. And just like that, the boy draws a bluish blade, its glow so luminous and serene. It could have been lit by a full moon on a cloudless night. He's never seen anything so beautiful. Even though it's heavier than he'd prefer, Arthur mutters an apology to Mr. Helstia before slicing a nearby barrel in half to test the blade. The barrel splits like butter. Engraved on the sword are the words Ballad of the Dawn, crafted by someone named W.K. Roman IV. Suddenly, the blade hums with what seems like electrical tension, forcing Arthur to drop it. When he picks it up again, he immediately notices a change. The weight and balance have shifted. The grip and handle now feel perfectly suited to his body. He thanks Sylvie for the suggestion and reflects that, though countless swords had passed through his hands in his previous life, none of them ever felt this right. After slicing through another barrel like it was paper, a memory resurfaces, a tale about a master craftsman who forged a scepter for one person only. That scepter had become like an extension of its wielder. But in that case, the user had to infuse the weapon with mana. This was different. Arthur had never heard of a weapon adapting itself to its wielder. Which leaves one question: who exactly is W.K. Roman IV? Before he can ponder further, Reynolds calls him home for dinner. Arthur quickly grabs another sword and pretends that's the one he picked for the exam, strapping Ballad of the Dawn to his waist. His father tests the blade, finding it slightly unbalanced. Perhaps the blacksmith tried to make it lighter, but still, it's perfect for someone like his son. He asks Vincent for a second opinion, and Vincent simply says that if Arthur likes it, that's all that matters. Then he notices the staff hanging at Arthur's side and asks what it's for. Trying to play it cool, Arthur says he found it on the floor and figured it looked tough enough to train with. Curious, Vincent calls for Jameson to check the inventory. Jameson laughs, recalling that the staff used to belong to some cranky old man who always complained that no one was worthy of it until one day he just hurled the thing at Jameson's head and stormed off. They had a few appraisers look it over, but everyone agreed it was just a regular staff, albeit a durable one. Realizing the staff wasn't even worth 2 stale loaves in this dump, Arthur lays on the charm. He sweet-talks his Uncle Vincent into giving it to him, and Vincent, unable to resist the kid's pleading face, gives in and hands it over without a second thought. In the days that followed, Arthur enjoyed peaceful, happy times with both his family and the Helstias. At the same time, he devoted himself fully to becoming a skilled adventurer. It had been 9 years since he arrived in this world, and everything was about to start making a lot more sense. Next scene, Arthur's birthday celebration. The Lewin prodigy has just turned 9. With a big smile, Vincent raises a toast and tells everyone to dig into the feast laid out before them. And just like that, the party begins surrounded by the people who matter most to Arthur, and with plenty of food to go around. Once dinner's done, it's time for presents. The first gift comes from his parents, a pair of gloves embedded with healing stones, enchanted by Alice herself. Then comes Vincent's turn. He jokes about asking Arthur to marry him, his gift being a pair of rings, one for Arthur and the other for Alice. Tabitha explains, if Arthur's mana ever drops to dangerously low levels, his mother's ring will begin to glow. Later, the Secura Group's gift is delivered by Adam Crench, a scroll that can transmit sound. The Lancer was just about to say it cost an arm and a leg, but Jasmine shuts him up with a front kick straight to his spine to teach him some manners. Now a little more mindful of his words, Adam explains that you have to use mana to leave a message on the scroll. Once that's done, Alice receives it and can reply just once. Grateful for all the incredible gifts, Arthur Lewin announces that he'll be leaving tomorrow. He promises everyone that he'll do everything he can to avoid giving them any reason to worry. In the end, his mother simply asks that he forget about fame or money and focus on staying safe. That night, something Arthur had been feeling for a while was finally clear. In this life, he has friends and family who love him, and he doesn't want to lose the sense of safety that brings. To protect those people, he would go to the ends of the earth and fight with everything he's got. And to do that, he needs to become even stronger than he was in his previous life when he was a king. As he gets ready for the journey, Lewin walks downstairs to the first floor and finds his family waiting in the entrance hall. Reynolds asks his son not to let his talent go to his head and reminds him that he doesn't have to face everything alone. Jasmine will be with him every step of the way. His mother, eyes filled with tears, just begs him not to forget to wear his ring. With that, they all say their goodbyes, and the boy steps through the door, beginning his new adventure. Outside the mansion, Jasmine Flamesworth is already waiting for her protege. As the young man stands ready to begin his journey, the sun reaches the hilltop, signaling the start of a new day on the vast continent of Dicathan. Check out these videos appearing on your screen and subscribe so you don't miss the next part.